Omega the Crown's Sacrifice. Omegaverse Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Reinhardt. Chapter 1 The Thorn Throne Burns. The crown still smelled of ash. Thorn Hall was no longer the quiet cathedral of the kings it had once been. Today, it was a crucible. Gold-veined marble columns trembled from the echoes of shouts, and the vaulted ceiling strained under the weight of fury. Outside the tall stained glass, the sun flickered like a dying eye. At the heart of it all, Darian Rask sat unmoved, fingers curled over the lionhead arms of the thorn throne, the crown too heavy for a head too young. His blue eyes swept across the uproar like a winter tide. They landed, at last, on the man below him, unbound, unbent, and utterly silent. Cassian Vale knelt in white. That white, which once shimmered like frost-laced silk, was now damp and clinging with blood from an earlier encounter. A single slash down the shoulder had begun to seep. Yet he held his head high, violet eyes glowing with a contemptuous calm that made the nobles bark louder. "He let them in!" someone screamed. Lord Edrose, paunch bulging over his belt, spat onto the black marble. The black obsidian banners were seen at the southern wall. How could they breach that fast unless someone withdrew the sentries? Darian did not flinch. Cassian didn't blink. And who commands the border patrol? Edrose thrust an accusing hand. Who signed the relocation decree for the 5th and 9th divisions? Cassian slowly raised his gaze. His voice, when it came, was ice-broken beneath boot. "I did." Silence struck the throne room like an axe. A sharp, painful absence. Viral, the high seer, shifted in his crimson robes. "Then you admit it." Cassian stood, not in defense, not in defiance, but with the languor of a man waking from a shallow nap. "I admit that I sent the soldiers north. Without council approval. Without hesitation," Cassian replied. "You damned snake." Silence. Darian's voice did not need volume. It uncoiled through the hall like a lash. All eyes snapped back to him. The new king was clad in steel-threaded velvet, his golden hair loose at the nape, and his features, too symmetrical, too sharp, were those sculpted not for mercy, but for myth. Blue eyes ringed with something darker than rage. Grief, perhaps, or guilt. He rose from the throne. A guard stepped forward. "Shall we arrest the regent, your grace?" Cassian turned his head, slowly, toward Darian. His expression was unreadable. "Don't bother," he said. "I'll take the punishment." "You?" Viral blinked. Cassian's lips curved. Not a smile. Something sharper. "I'll take the lashings. You need someone to bleed, don't you?" Murmurs erupted. This wasn't law. This wasn't precedent. And yet, Darian stepped down from the throne. His boots rang against marble as he approached his regent, his executioner, his protector, his Cassian. The guards presented him the whip. Braided oxhide, 10 tails, metal-tipped, reserved for traitors. Cassian untied the laces at his chest. White silk slid from his shoulders, exposing a pale, unmarred back. The air trembled. No one spoke. The first lash broke silence. Cassian's shoulders flinched, but no sound escaped him. The second drew blood. Darian didn't tremble. His arm remained steady, but his lips parted on a silent breath, and something behind his eyes cracked. The third lash landed across the previous two, opening a blossom of red across alabaster skin. Blood ran in slow rivulets down the man's spine. His hair, long, black, shining even in pain, spilled over one shoulder like a shadow come alive. By the 6th strike, Cassian's knees had touched stone. By the 9th, his hands clenched into fists. By the 10th, Darian was shaking. He dropped the whip. "You've paid," the king said. Cassian didn't answer. He didn't need to. The throne room dispersed like broken teeth from a jaw. Night in Silverthorn was a long, cold breath. Darian waited until the guards rotated. He waited until the high priests retreated. Then he slipped down the stone halls like water through cracks, boots silent, cloak dark. The dungeon door stood open. Only one cell was lit. Cassian sat on the stone cot, bare from the waist up, bandages still untouched beside him. His back looked like it had been written on with fire. Darian stepped inside and shut the door behind him. He didn't say anything. Cassian didn't turn. He didn't have to. Darian crossed the space in 3 quick strides and collapsed to his knees before him. His hands clutched at Cassian's waist, forehead pressed to the other man's stomach. "Why?" His voice cracked. "Why didn't you explain anything?" Cassian looked down at him, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Would it have mattered? You let them think. They're not wrong." Darian lifted his head. "You could have stopped this." Cassian's fingers brushed against his golden hair, gently, like he was smoothing a favorite page in a book. "You needed someone to burn. Better me than you." "You always do this," Darian whispered. "You always throw yourself into the fire first." "You're the king," Cassian said. "I'm just the blade in your hand." "I don't want a blade." Darian's voice turned hoarse. "I want you." A breath caught in Cassian's throat. For a heartbeat he said nothing. Then, softly, bitterly, "Then stop being the king." Darian's lips found his skin. His mouth traced over old scars, fresh wounds, seeking something warm. Cassian tensed beneath him. Sharp inhale held at the edge of pain and pleasure. "I can't stop," Darian said against his ribs. "I can't stop being yours." Cassian closed his eyes. "Don't say that." "You'll never say it back," Darian whispered. "Will you?" Cassian didn't answer, but his hand cupped the back of Darian's neck, drawing him close. His thumb brushed the gland just beneath his nape, the part of an Omega's body that had no defense, the part that a true alpha would mark and keep. Darian's whole body shivered. Cassian's voice, dark and soft, fell into the stillness. "You're not ready." "For what?" "To be king. To kill me." Darian swallowed. "I won't." "You will." Cassian leaned down until their foreheads touched. "One day." His fingers ghosted over Darian's scent gland again, deliberately. "When you do," he murmured, "make it clean." Darian's eyes stung. His hands clutched tighter at Cassian's back. "But not yet," Cassian said. He tilted the king's face upward. Violet eyes met blue. "Not tonight." Far away, in the south, the banner of the obsidian host unfurled in the wind. And under the moon the first howl rose. Chapter 2: The Chains That Hold the King. The halls of Thornhall had never echoed louder. Darian stood alone in the center of the high chamber, the stone dome above him humming with echoes of old verdicts and older betrayals. Sunlight streamed through the rose-glass windows in fractured shards, painting his golden hair with broken crimson. But the king was silent. The nobles circled like vultures around meat not yet dead. "He must be tried." High Seer Viral's voice was calm, clipped, bloodless. "This is not just internal. The Empire watches. If the regent is not interrogated, it will be seen as a silent admission of guilt." Darian did not speak. "Already, the Western Trade Guild is questioning our stability," added Lord Valen. "The Obsidian host has moved troops across the river. A ruler who defends a traitor will soon find his throne hollow." Still, Darian's gaze didn't flicker. He stared ahead at the vacant chair opposite his own, where Cassian would normally sit during council. The emptiness burned brighter than fire. Viral took a step closer. "Your Grace, he is no longer a regent. He is an accused criminal." Darian's knuckles whitened against the carved throne. "Criminal." The word clanged in his ears like a dropped sword. Cassian Vale, the boy who had once tucked blankets around his fevered body, whispered stories into his ears to calm the night terrors, who had smiled without softness and killed without apology, but never let harm come near him. The man who had just bled across the steps of the throne, not because he had to, but because Darian needed someone to lash. And they dared call him criminal. Viral inclined his head. The holy tribunal must have access to him by sunrise. Darian finally spoke. His voice was soft, deadlier than a blade. No one touches him. Your Grace. No one, he repeated, and the temperature of the room dropped. Viral's lips thinned. Then you leave the Empire no choice. He turned to go. As the chamber emptied, Darian sat there, alone, heart hammering like a war drum inside a chest carved from frost. Cassian burned the letters without blinking. The cell was cold. Always was. But fire licked the edge of the parchment with the same ease he had once used to light candles over Darian's childhood fever bed. The pages curled. One by one. Maps, orders, movements. Gone. He sat cross-legged on the cot, shirtless again, hair undone. Bruises bloomed like violets across his spine and ribs, each one a kiss of loyalty. His wrists, bound earlier by golden cuffs, now lay bare. They hadn't even locked the door. They knew he wouldn't run. He never did. Ash drifted to the floor. Only one thing remained. A single sheet of pristine paper. No ink. No seal. Just blank. Cassian stared at it a long moment, then folded it with the same care as a love letter. He placed it at the edge of the bed, where Darian would find it if he ever came back. He would. He always did. Outside, footsteps approached. Cassian didn't look up until the door opened. Darian. He stepped in without his crown, his robe, or his guards. Just boots, gloves, and exhaustion written across every elegant angle of his face. The dungeon light made him look too beautiful for war, too young for blood. Gold hair cheeks flushed as if from running, or rage, or something else. Cassian smiled. Not mockery, not quite kindness, but something close to memory. You've started coming earlier, he murmured. Darian said nothing at first, then closed the door. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned against the stone wall like he might slide down it. I had to stop Viral from dragging you to the pyre this morning. Appreciated, Cassian said. I didn't do it for them. I know. Silence stretched like a taut wire between them. Then Darian spoke, voice softer now, almost too quiet to hear. Are you like this with everyone? Cassian raised an eyebrow. Like what? Like... Darian gestured vaguely. This. You burn kingdoms. Then smirk at me like I'm the only one worth saving. Cassian tilted his head, considering. What do you think? I think I want you to lie to me. A ghost of a smile passed Cassian's lips. Then yes. Only you. Darian closed his eyes. You bastard. You always did have a taste for bastards. The king's hands clenched at his sides. He crossed the space between them in 3 steps, stopping just short of contact. You're not afraid of what they'll do to you. No. Why? Cassian looked up at him, eyes violet and endless and full of 1,000 knives. Because the only one who can really hurt me is standing right in front of me. Darian sucked in a breath. Cassian's voice lowered. And he hasn't figured out how yet. Their faces were too close. The air between them sizzled with tension sharp enough to draw blood. Darian's scent, embers and pine, spilled into the cell, drowning everything else. Cassian didn't flinch. He never did. But he didn't pull away either. Darian's hand found the bars of the cell window. He leaned forward, almost like a confession or a curse. You never lied to me, he said. I did, Cassian replied softly. You just liked the lies I told. It was raining that night. In his dreams, Darian saw lilies. He was small again, maybe 8, maybe 9. The garden smelled of wet grass and ash from the spring storm. The stone lily garden, hidden behind the northern wing of Thornhall, was the only place they were ever allowed to run without guards. He remembered the boy, a beta noble's son, older, cruel. He had pinned Darian to the ground, fist ready. "You think you're better than us?" the boy had hissed. "Just 'cause your blood's royal?" Darian had bitten his lip so hard he tasted iron. Then he saw black, a figure blurred through the rain. Cassian, barely 14, maybe 15 then, silent, calm, and lethal. He had seized the beta boy's wrist mid-punch and twisted. There was a snap, a scream. Darian remembered his own breath catching as Cassian turned to him. "You're the king," he had said. His voice back then was higher, but no less cold. "They don't get to touch you. Not ever." Darian woke up with the ghost of that moment still trembling in his bones. He sat at the edge of the bed until sunrise. By mid-morning, the ultimatum had arrived. Viral stood once again before the king, parchment in hand. "If the regent is not formally tried by dusk," he said, "the empire will declare the crown compromised. They will march." Darian didn't flinch. "They want war," Viral said. "We give them no reason, we give them none." The king stood. In the dim silence of the throne room, he descended the steps without his cape, his blade, or his crown. He looked Viral in the eye. "If it's war they want—" Darian's voice was low. Behind him, the guards tensed. He turned slowly, and Viral saw it then, saw it before anyone else did. That Darian Rask, golden-haired and wolf-blooded, had already chosen his battlefield. "Then we give them one." Far below, in the dark of Silverthorn's lowest cell, Cassian sat with the blank letter in his lap, folding and unfolding it. He heard the stirrings of movement overhead. He smiled faintly. "I told you," he murmured to the stone walls, to the chains, to the echo of the boy who once cried in a lily garden. "You'd get there." Chapter 3: The First Unforgivable. The crowd had gathered before sunrise. They spilled across Moonwatch Square like storm water, pressing against the edges of the world with breathless anticipation. Mothers clutched children to their chests. Soldiers stood in full armor. Merchants whispered behind gloved hands. Above them, the sky hung thick and unmoving, cloudless, but gray with promise. On the steps of the raised dais, a pillar of black iron glinted in the morning light. The thorn rod was already in place. They hadn't used it in over a decade. Darian stood behind the ceremonial curtain of velvet and chain, breath caught halfway between duty and dread. His hands were gloved in wolf hide, not for symbolism, for grip. "Your Grace," said a soft voice at his side. Viral. Darian didn't turn to look at him. His eyes were fixed ahead, on the crowd, on the stage, on the slow, deliberate footsteps that echoed across the stone. Cassian was being brought forward. 2 guards flanked him, though they didn't touch him. They walked a pace behind, as if wary of proximity. The chains on Cassian's wrists dragged across the stone in a slow metallic rasp, and yet his steps were steady, slow, regal even now. He wore black, a long, high-collared robe, trimmed in silver thread. It flowed around him like smoke, and beneath the shadows of its hood, his violet eyes gleamed like bruised amethysts. Unrepentant, beautiful, untouched by shame. The people whispered his name, some in fear, some in awe. Cassian Vale had never once bowed, not to kings, not to laws, and now, even in chains, he walked as if he owned the sky. At the top of the dais, he stopped. He turned to face Darian, and their eyes locked. Everything else fell away. Darian's hands tightened. He heard Viral's voice again, low and crisp. 132 dead. 2 regiments decimated. Civilians among them. The council demands reparation. "I know," Darian said. His voice was ash. "The church demands blood." Darian stepped forward. A guard brought forth the decree. Cassian Vale, Darian read aloud. By order of the Crown and Church, for treason by unauthorized military reassignment and the resulting loss of border lives, you are sentenced to public punishment by thorn rod, 30 lashes, and indefinite solitary confinement in Silverthorn. A hush fell. Cassian said nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward and unfastened his robe. It slid from his shoulders. He wore nothing beneath it. The crowd gasped. His body was pale, lithe, the physique of someone who had long ago mastered the balance between magic and sword. Not a muscle twitched. Not a shiver betrayed him. His back, unmarred now, would not remain so for long. Darian stepped onto the platform, boots echoing like war drums. He stood behind Cassian. He raised the thorn rod. Cassian tilted his head, just enough for Darian to hear. "Hit true," he said softly. "Don't disappoint me." The first lash struck. Cassian didn't flinch. The second tore skin. He didn't cry out. By the sixth, his shoulder blades were painted crimson. Blood ran down the elegant curve of his spine in thin rivulets, catching on the ridges of old scars, a tapestry of loyalty too many had mistaken for treason. By the 10th, Darian's arms trembled. He couldn't stop. He didn't. 15. 20. Cassian's legs buckled once. He caught himself. Darian's heart cracked like stone under frost. The whip in his hand felt like it had grown teeth. 25. Cassian looked over his shoulder. His face, smeared with blood, was still unspeakably beautiful, sharp and sculpted like it had been carved from ivory and midnight. A faint smile touched his lips. "Almost there, my king." Darian nearly dropped the rod. The final strike landed. Cassian collapsed to his knees, arms still behind him, blood dripping to the stone. No scream, no plea. He knelt at Darian's feet like some terrible angel. Night fell like penance. The dungeon door creaked. Darian entered without guards. Cassian lay on the cot, unmoving. His wounds had been wrapped crudely, standard soldier work, nothing more. Darian sank to his knees beside him. His gloves were gone. His fingers hovered over the bandages, trembling. "Why?" he whispered. Cassian didn't answer. Darian pressed his hand, finally, against Cassian's shoulder. The warmth that met him through blood and linen made him ache. "You could have told them you had reason. Told them you weren't." Cassian stirred. His voice, hoarse but steady, answered. "And ruin your chance to prove yourself?" Darian's head dropped. His forehead pressed against Cassian's side. "You idiot." Cassian's hand moved, sluggish, but firm. He pulled Darian close until the king half lay across him, face buried in his chest. "You idiot," Darian whispered again, voice cracking. "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep putting yourself between me and the blade." Cassian's fingers curled in his hair. "Then become the blade. I don't want to hurt you. Then I'll keep sinning," Cassian murmured, "until you have no choice." Darian choked on a breath. "Why are you like this?" Cassian didn't reply. The silence stretched, warm and suffocating. "I dreamt of you last night," Darian whispered. "You were standing in the flames. You didn't look afraid." Cassian smiled faintly. "That's because I lit them." Darian lifted his head, eyes wet, jaw tight. "Please, just once. Tell me it's not too late. Tell me you don't want to burn." Cassian's smile deepened, soft and cruel. "Too late," he said. Darian curled into him anyway. Even if the world burned. Far to the east the signal fire lit. The obsidian host had crossed the river. And the first unforgivable was now complete. Chapter 4: The Scent Beneath the Skin. The scent of blood never left the dungeon. It clung to the stone walls like a bitter perfume, thick, metallic, and lingering. Darian inhaled it with each step, the weight of it growing heavier the closer he drew to the end of the hall. The guards flanking the last door straightened as he approached. One moved to open his mouth. Darian didn't let him. "Out," he said quietly. They obeyed without question. The iron door creaked open. The light inside was low, a single lantern guttering near the ceiling. The cot was stripped to bare canvas. A bowl of water had gone cold on the floor, and Cassian lay curled on his side, spine to the door, long black hair spread across the stone like spilled ink. Darian stepped in and shut the door behind him. It echoed like a seal. Cassian didn't move. "Did Viral finally convince you to finish the job?" Darian said nothing. He crossed the room, knelt beside the cot, and laid the bundle in his arms. Clean bandages, salve, a cloth at Cassian's side. "I'm moving you." Cassian shifted, just enough to glance back. Violet eyes glimmered under his lashes. "You're breaking protocol." "I'm king." A slow blink. "So you are." They said nothing more as Darian helped him sit. The shift of Cassian's robe revealed the wounds across his back, thin lines of angry red. Some split again, blood crusted black at the edges. Darian's throat tightened. He dipped the cloth into the water, wrung it out, and began wiping the worst of the dried blood away. Cassian didn't flinch. "You should have screamed," Darian muttered. Cassian looked down at him. "You wanted me to? I wanted you to stop pretending it didn't matter." "It didn't." His voice was quiet, almost tender. "Not compared to what it gave you." Darian pressed the cloth harder than he should have. Cassian's jaw clenched, but still he said nothing. When the bandages were done, Darian didn't move away. His hand hovered at Cassian's nape, fingers barely brushing the dark hair there. The skin was warm, too warm. "You have a fever," he said. "You sound surprised." "I'm not." Darian swallowed. "I shouldn't care." Cassian tilted his head. "And yet." Darian leaned forward before he could stop himself. He pressed his forehead against the slope of Cassian's shoulder, the skin still too hot, too real. "I can't trust anyone," he whispered. "When you're not here, I can't even sleep." Cassian didn't answer. Darian shifted closer, arms slowly circling his waist. His voice dropped lower. "You're the only one who tells me the truth." Cassian let out a slow breath. His hands remained at his sides, unmoving, but his head tilted just enough to rest lightly against Darian's temple. "You're too soft like this," he murmured. "It doesn't suit a king." "I don't care," Darian said. "Not when we're alone." The words lingered. Then something changed, soft and sudden. The air between them grew hot. The scent hit first. Pine and frost, underscored by the bitter citrus of Cassian's magic. Darian's breath caught. He clung tighter. The pheromonal flare between them was brief, but real. Cassian stiffened. "Darian!" "I didn't mean to," Darian whispered, flushed, voice shaking. "I just—" Cassian gritted his teeth. His hand shot up. In one clean motion, he bit into the side of his own neck. The air rippled. The bond, fragile, aching, half-formed, shattered. Darian recoiled. Blood ran down Cassian's collarbone. He licked it away with the indifference of someone used to pain. "You're not thinking straight," he said. "You never do when you're warm." Darian stared at him, horrified. Cassian's smile was slow, vicious, and full of heat. "Don't act shocked. You wanted it." "I didn't want." "Me? Or the bond?" Cassian's eyes burned. "Because one you can have. The other will destroy you." Darian shook his head. "Stop." "I won't," Cassian said. "Not until you understand." The tension cracked like thunder between them. Then Darian broke. He moved forward again, more forceful this time, and buried his face against Cassian's shoulder, arms trembling. "Please," he murmured. "Just don't do this." Cassian let his eyes fall shut. He didn't pull away. But he didn't hold him either. "You don't get to ask that," he said softly. "Not when you're the one who holds the knife." Darian's breath hitched. Outside, the palace stirred with rumors. Inside, the king curled closer to his regent, and his only weakness. Somewhere between waking and memory, a scene unfolded. Cassian's study years ago. Darian had been 10, maybe 11. Syl, the maid assigned to him, had fled the room in tears. "She said I'm not even real nobility," Darian whispered, too ashamed to cry. "She said I'm just an orphan with good luck." Cassian didn't look up from the scroll he was reading. "She's not wrong," he said mildly. Darian froze. Cassian looked up. His violet gaze was unreadable. "You are an orphan, but luck had nothing to do with it." Darian's lower lip trembled. Cassian set the scroll aside. He stood, walked over, and knelt in front of him. "You are a prince," he said. His voice was lower than colder, but still steady. "And one day you'll be king. You don't need to be born into power. You just need to make sure they believe it belongs to you." Darian blinked at him. "Does it?" he asked. Cassian's fingers brushed his hand. "It will. Will you stay with me? Always." "Does that mean—" Darian looked down. "You'll belong to me too?" Cassian's smile had been razor thin. "You'll have the whole kingdom," he said. "What's one more thing?" Present day. Cassian leaned back against the wall, face pale, breath ragged. Darian sat beside him, hand resting over his. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Cassian turned his head. "You keep touching me like this," he murmured. "I'm going to start forgetting how this ends." Darian didn't look at him. "I don't want it to end." Cassian let out a dry breath of laughter. "Then stop acting like you'll live forever." His thumb brushed over Darian's pulse. "You get close like this again, I might not want to die." Darian closed his eyes. Outside, the city burned brighter with rumor. Inside, the king pressed himself closer to the man who would break him. Chapter 5: The Promise of Broken Bones. The lilies were blooming again. White petals opened like pale mouths toward the sky, brushing against the stone benches of the old garden. Time had softened the edges of the once pristine grounds. Moss laced between the bricks, and vines curled around broken arches. The air was sweet with memory. Darian sat alone on the marble ledge, gloved fingers resting lightly on his knee. His eyes were distant. He hadn't stepped foot in the stone lily garden in years. Not since the blood. The memory bloomed, sharp and uninvited. He had been 13, too proud to run, too young to win. The other boy had been older, beta-born, the son of a duke, emboldened by his father's wealth and his own recent scent shift. He had taunted Darian for days, but that morning he'd snapped. It happened in front of the other apprentices, the guards, the servants. "You think your wolf blood makes you better than us?" the boy had sneered. Darian had stood tall. "I don't think I know." The boy's punch knocked him to the ground. The laughter had stung worse than the blow. Then came the second hit. Then the third. Then the laughter stopped. Cassian had walked in. He hadn't run. He never ran. He stepped between the crowd, eyes flat and cold, like a blade unsheathed. He didn't shout, didn't ask what happened. He just grabbed the boy's wrist mid-swing. There was a sickening crunch. And then another. The boy screamed. Cassian didn't stop until the elbow bent the wrong way, until the bone pushed through the skin, until the scent of blood overpowered the lilies. Only then did he drop the arm like it disgusted him. No one moved. No one breathed. Cassian turned to the crowd. His voice, when he spoke, was soft. "Anyone else forget who he is?" Silence. He looked down at Darian, still on the ground, blood in his mouth and pride cracked in half. "You're the prince," he said, and louder to everyone else. "Those who raise a hand to the future king do not deserve hands." The other boy died that night from shock and blood loss. Cassian didn't attend the funeral. He took the punishment, 10 lashes and 3 weeks of isolation. He never flinched, and Darian never forgot. Footsteps pulled Darian back to the present. He didn't need to look to know. Cassian came to a stop a few paces away, carrying a small clay flask in one hand. He didn't speak, just held it out. Darian reached for it, brushing fingers against his. The flask was warm. Still hiding in gardens, Cassian murmured, voice dry. Very royal of you. Still walking around like you weren't half dead last night, Darian shot back. Cassian leaned against the nearest column, robe draped casually off one shoulder. The bruises had faded, but not completely. The red marks along his throat peaked just above the collar, like reminders of restraint. They passed the flask back and forth in silence for a while. The garden breathed around them. Cassian exhaled. You ever think about that day? Darian tilted his head. Which? The one with that beta brat. You were half a second from passing out. Darian glanced away. Cassian smiled faintly. If you hadn't screamed my name, I might not have made it in time. I didn't scream, Darian muttered. Oh, you did. Pathetic little voice. Cassian, help me. Very undignified. I hate you. No, you don't. Darian drank. He could still remember the blood on the lilies. The way Cassian's hand had felt when he pulled him upright. Cold, steady, unshakable. He turned to look at him now. Cassian leaned lazily against the pillar, dark hair catching the evening light, violet eyes unreadable. He looked too beautiful to be real, like something crafted by a bitter god and abandoned out of jealousy. Darian's chest tightened. Why did you do it? He asked quietly. Cassian raised a brow. That day, Darian said, you didn't have to kill him. Cassian's mouth curved into something sharp. He touched you. And you don't touch what's mine. Darian inhaled, sharp and low. He hadn't realized how close they'd gotten until now. His body shifted before his brain caught up, and suddenly he was leaning in, breath hot against Cassian's throat. You say that, he whispered. But then you spend all your time trying to make me let go. Cassian didn't move. I'm testing your grip, he said. Darian's lips brushed his collarbone. He bit down. Not hard enough to draw blood, but enough to leave a mark. Cassian hissed softly. Don't let anyone see that, he murmured. How else will you pretend to punish me? Darian pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. I'm not pretending anymore. Cassian's gaze darkened. For a moment, the air between them pulsed. Not with magic, but with something older. Something older than thrones, older than crowns. Something neither of them could name. Cassian straightened. He took the flask, drained the last of it, and with a casual flick of his wrist, tossed it into the pond. The sound of clay hitting water echoed through the garden. I moved the border regiments because it was necessary, he said. Darian didn't speak. Do you regret it? Cassian asked. Now that it's done? No. Cassian looked at him. I only regret, Darian said slowly, that you didn't tell me sooner. Their eyes held. Then Cassian turned, cloak swirling. I'll see you at council, he said. He didn't wait for an answer. Later that night, deep in the royal woods behind Thornhall, a body hit the ground with a wet thud. The face was unrecognizable. The armor, however, was not. Obsidian steel, imperial crest. The assassin had never reached his target, because Cassian had been waiting, and he always struck first. Chapter 6, The Echo of His Name. The cathedral smelled of incense and dust. Light poured in through stained glass in fractured reds and golds, draping the assembled nobility in hues far too noble for the mouths they used to speak. Darian stood at the head of the great hall, spine straight, face impassive, his crown catching the morning light with cruel angles. Before him, judgment. Behind him, Silence. And beside him, Cassian. Clad in black, arms folded, face unreadable. He leaned against a pillar as if all of this bored him to tears, and maybe it did. He hadn't spoken once. The nobles were louder. He has acted without decree. He has manipulated troop movements at will. He brought the border to ruin and lied about it under seal. Your Grace, we speak not from fear, but loyalty. Loyalty to what? Darian cut through the noise, voice low. To their credit, some fell silent. Others, emboldened by the church's presence, pressed on. High Seer Viral stepped forward, robes trailing like blood across the marble. Your Grace, he said, the regent's crimes are documented. His authority was given by your father, yes, but your father is dead. The throne rests with you now. Darian's fingers tightened around the hilt of the ceremonial blade at his side. He was appointed for life, he said evenly. My father's seal names him regent, guardian of the throne, and protector of my blood. He has become a threat to that blood. Viral's tone was calm, reasonable. Poison in silk. Darian's mouth curved slightly, not a smile. You would lecture me on threats? Viral blinked. Darian stepped forward. His voice dropped, soft and lethal. He taught me how to read, how to wield a blade, how to kill. Every scar on my body was earned beside him. Every battle I survived. Every night I didn't scream in my sleep. Every secret passage I escaped through, he built. He turned slightly, eyes brushing over Cassian's unmoved figure. He didn't save me from the wolves. He taught me to become one. The chamber fell silent. No one breathed. Darian let the silence stretch. Then, softly, without him, there is no king, no crown, no thorn hall. One of the nobles broke. You would risk war with the church for one man? Darian looked at him. Yes. Then you are not the king we. Darian's voice cut across his words like steel. I am the king you have. He turned on his heel. This session is dismissed. He strode from the cathedral without another glance. Cassian followed without a word. They didn't speak again until hours later. Silverthorn's war room had been cleared. Darian leaned over the long oak table, maps and documents spread before him. But he wasn't looking at any of them. Cassian stood at the window, wine in hand. He sipped, sighed, and finally broke the silence. Well, he drawled. Little wolf's got teeth. Darian didn't turn around. I've always had them. Cassian chuckled. Not like that. You think I'm weak? I think you're trying very hard not to be. Darian's jaw clenched. Cassian took another drink, then set the cup down with a soft clink. You threw yourself between me and the entire cathedral, he said. Darian finally turned. His eyes were quiet fire. You would have done the same. No, Cassian said. I would have let them burn. Darian crossed the room. He stopped a step too close. You didn't say a word, he said. While they accused you, while they called for your exile. Cassian tilted his head. Would it have changed anything if I had? It would have changed something for me. Cassian's smile was faint. That's why I didn't. The silence stretched. Darian's hands clenched. He didn't say another word, just turned and left the room. Cassian didn't follow. The soup was warm. It sat on Darian's desk, steam curling from the ceramic bowl like a beckoning hand. He stared at it in silence, the scent of moon lotus root and wild pepper hitting him with a force that nearly unmade him. He hadn't tasted it since he was a boy, since the fever. He didn't have to ask who'd made it. Cassian was sitting in the corner, legs stretched, boots propped on the edge of the windowsill. A book rested on his chest. He didn't look up. Darian picked up the bowl. He took a sip. The taste exploded against his tongue, memory and heat and something close to grief. He set the bowl down with more force than necessary. Cassian raised a brow finally. You poisoned it? Cassian smirked. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. You're smug. I'm right. Darian stood. The bowl clinked against the desk again. He walked over to Cassian, slow, deliberate. I defended you today, he said. Publicly. Against the most powerful men in the realm. Yes. I gave them a reason to think I'm weak. Cassian stretched. You are. Darian's hand slammed into the wall beside Cassian's head. The regent didn't flinch. You think this is a game, Darian said. I think you've never figured out if you want to crown me or kill me. Their faces were inches apart now. You're the one who told me to be ruthless, Darian said. I didn't say be stupid. Cassian's voice was quieter now. Do you regret what I did? No. Then why are you shaking? Darian's hand closed around the front of Cassian's shirt. You keep saying I'm soft, he whispered. You don't know what it's like. Feeling like every time I blink, they're coming for you. Cassian's lips quirked. He reached up, slow, and tapped Darian's chest, just over the heart. You'd be less worried, he said, if you didn't care so much. I don't, Darian said. You're mine. That's different. Cassian laughed. Soft. Dangerous. You're getting possessive. I've always been. Darian leaned in, pressed his mouth to Cassian's collarbone. Bit down. Cassian's breath caught. Darian pulled back just far enough to see the mark bloom. Don't let anyone see it, Cassian murmured. How else will you punish me in public? Darian didn't answer. He shoved Cassian back against the window. The glass trembled. Their mouths crashed together, clashing teeth, bruised lips, breath stolen in ragged gasps. Cassian's hands came up but didn't push. He gripped Darian's sides like a man gauging strength, not denying it. The kiss was brutal, hungry. Darian kissed like he ruled, with intensity, with desperation, with the weight of everything he couldn't say aloud. When he finally pulled back, Cassian was panting, but still smiling. Want to kill me, he said softly. You don't need to kiss me first. Darian's throat moved. I wasn't trying to kill you. I know. Cassian reached up, thumb brushing the corner of his mouth. But next time, he murmured. Bite harder. Outside the window, the wind stirred the flags above Thornhall, and somewhere deep in the shadows of the royal grove, a body was dragged into a well of silence. The Empire had made its move. Cassian had moved first. Again. Chapter 7, The Infection in the Lilies. It started with black spots. Tiny blotches bloomed across the arms of a child in the eastern slums. No pain at first, no heat. Just dark bruises that pulsed faintly beneath the skin like rot trying to breathe. The mother had brought him to the city temple, weeping. By nightfall, the priests were dead. And by the third day, 5 streets were closed. The capital stirred with dread. Silverthorn Infirmary overflowed. Pale-robed healers moved like ghosts through the stone halls, their gloves soaked in ash solution, their expressions brittle with fear. The scent of disinfectant barely masked the underlying stench. Decay, magic, and something older, hungrier. Darian stood in the center of it all, shoulders squared, fingers clenched. He had barely slept. The reports on the desk in front of him were stacked like gravestones. 17 infected, 9 dead, 3 priests missing. Rumors ran like blood beneath the words. Whispers of shadows moving through the east quarter, of flowers blooming in the mouths of corpses. A subtle step behind him. You didn't call me, Cassian said. Darian didn't turn. You're not a physician. Neither are you. Cassian stepped to his side, gaze skimming the reports with the disinterest of a man reading a weather forecast. Black spot plague, he murmured. Rare. Regional. Should have burned out in 2 streets. Not 5. Darian shot him a glance. You knew it was coming. No. But you knew it would spread. Cassian tilted his head. Yes. Darian's eyes darkened. Did you make it? No. Darian's voice dropped. But you let it in. Cassian didn't answer. That was answer enough. Council convened within the hour. The nobles shouted. The high priests hissed. Viral slammed a scroll down onto the table like a gavel made of parchment. The plague moves unnaturally, he said. The city healers agree. Its rhythm is magical. Its boundaries are deliberate. He turned eyes cold. Only one man in this palace is both capable and cruel enough to weaponize illness. Cassian, seated at the far end of the table, didn't bother to look up. Viral's voice rang louder. Cassian Vale. Do you deny it? Cassian glanced up, slow and bored. Deny what? That I'm capable? Or that I'm cruel? You allowed the infection to spread. I allowed nothing, Cassian said calmly. You lot failed to contain a disease you didn't understand. Then why? Viral growled. Did the infection turn at the old Lily Gate? Why not further north? Why not toward the armory? Cassian's mouth curved. Maybe it likes flowers. Darian stood abruptly. The chamber stilled. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Enough. One word. One command. And the storm cracked. This is not a trial, he said. And until I say otherwise, Cassian Vale remains my regent. But, do you doubt me, Viral? Viral stepped back. The nobles sat in wary silence. Darian met none of their eyes, only Cassian's. And in those violet depths, for the first time he saw something close to danger. Not the kind that protected, the kind that unmade. The night was colder in the east. Cassian moved through the old slum with his hood up, boots muffled by the cracked cobblestones. The fog clung low, unnaturally thick, and the houses leaned into the street like drunks whispering secrets. He stopped at the edge of the old Lily Gate. The archway stood crooked, its old stone cracked and overgrown with moss. Beneath it, black petals. Dozens of dead lilies, blooming where no flowers had bloomed in years. He knelt, fingers brushing the edge of one. The bloom withered on contact, crumbling into black dust. Cassian's eyes narrowed. He stood, then turned and slipped into a narrow alley. The shadows stretched toward him like old friends. He passed rusted grates and shattered windows, climbed the side of a building with the ease of someone who had lived here once, long ago. On the rooftop he knelt again, drew back his sleeve. Under the skin of his forearm, faint lines glowed, magic scars shaped like roots, ancient and curling. He pressed his palm to the stone. A circle flared beneath him, dark, intricate, old language, new design, a containment rune but not a passive one. A living seal. Cassian exhaled. I told you, he whispered to no one. You're not ready. The rune pulsed in response. At the palace, Darian stood in the war room alone. The last of the nobles had departed. The doors were locked. He picked up the final report. The one the royal physician hadn't dared to read aloud. It bore only one sentence. The plague is not natural. It is a corrosion-based curse, a higher form of spirit magic. His fingers trembled. He set the page down and crossed the room. In the drawer beneath the weapons cabinet lay a small, flat disc of stone. Smooth, circular, inscribed in a language he couldn't read, but Cassian could. It had been hidden here for weeks. The mark at its center burned now. A lever. The name whispered like a wound. He turned the disc over. It was warm. Later that night, Cassian returned. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. Darian met him in his chambers. Bowl of untouched soup on the desk. Gloves discarded. Crown crooked. You didn't kill them, Darian said. No. But you let the fire spread. Cassian sat on the edge of the table. His robes were damp with dew. He didn't answer. You want me to hate you, Darian said. Cassian met his eyes. No, he said softly. I want you to need to kill me. Why? Because that's the only way this ends. Darian stepped forward. He inhaled and froze. Cassian's scent clung to the room like smoke. But it was under his own skin now, too. He could feel it, curling around his heartbeat. He could smell it on his wrist under his collar. He hadn't noticed when it had gotten there. Cassian stood. You're infected, you know, he said. Not with the plague. With me. Darian's mouth tightened. I'll burn you out, he said. Cassian smiled. Try. He stepped past him, shoulder brushing his arm. The scent bloomed again. Lilies, blood, and something darker. Darian closed his eyes. He didn't follow. Not this time. Chapter 8, The Room with No Crown. The east wing of Silverthorn Palace was not marked on any map. Built in the years before the last war, it housed no court offices, no banquet halls, no guest rooms. The walls were thicker, enchanted with privacy wards. Only one door opened without spell key. Only one person held that key. And tonight, Darian used it with enough force to nearly break the lock. The door slammed behind them. Cassian didn't resist. He stood in the center of the private chamber, silent as ever. The moonlight from the narrow window painted pale lines across his cheekbones, carving out a face already too sharp, too cruelly beautiful for comfort. Darian's chest heaved. His voice came out hoarse. Did you release it? Cassian didn't blink. You'll have to be more specific. I've released a great many things. Darian stepped forward. He was already flushed, already trembling, though he hadn't yet realized it was not only from fury. Don't play that game with me. The plague, the runes, the black veins, the lilies rotting under the gates. Gorgeous, weren't they? Cassian murmured. Nothing dies quite as beautifully as a flower. You're laughing. I'm not. Darian's hands were fists. You let people die. People always die. Stop it. His voice cracked. Stop pretending you don't care. Cassian tilted his head. And if I do? That was when Darian lost it. His hand slammed into Cassian's chest, shoving him backward into the door with a force that made the iron creak. But Cassian still didn't flinch. He hit the wood with a grunt and stayed there, shoulders relaxed, expression unreadable. Darian pressed in. Say something, he growled. Say you didn't do it. Say you didn't smile while the children screamed. Cassian's mouth curled. You want me to lie? I want you to make sense. I never promised you that. The temperature in the room rose sharply. Neither of them noticed, until the sigils etched into the eastern wall flared, sparked, and burst. Magic detonated across the stone with a sharp crack, casting a flash of white light. Embers danced across the walls. One of the tapestries caught fire at the corner and smoldered. Darian didn't flinch. His hand closed around the back of Cassian's neck. Tight, too tight. Cassian's eyes narrowed, but still he didn't move. You're burning, Darian breathed. It's all over you. Is that what this is? Cassian asked. Concern. No, Darian's voice dropped lower. Possession. The air thickened. The scent hit him fully. Cassian's pheromones, layered and sharp, threaded with that impossible floral smoke. Always just a shade too potent. Darian's own scent flared in response, heat spiraling beneath his skin. He groaned and didn't realize he had. Damn you, he muttered. You know what that does to me. Cassian's breath brushed his cheek. Good. Stop. You don't want me to. Darian's head tipped forward, nose brushing Cassian's temple, his fingers digging harder into the nape of his neck. Cassian hissed. You're shaking. I'm not. You are. Like you're burning from the inside out. I told you to stop. You don't give me orders in this room. Cassian's voice was low and cold, laced with something dangerous. You think locking the door makes you king in here? he whispered. I'm always king. Cassian's eyes glinted. Then act like it. Something cracked in Darian. His mouth found Cassian's. The kiss was not tender. It was not sweet. It was teeth and tongue and war, just like everything else between them. Cassian let it happen, allowed the pull, the desperate clutch of Darian's hands, the half-mad growl vibrating in his chest. But he didn't respond. Not fully. Not yet. His hands never rose. Darian pulled back a fraction, gasping. You! He panted, forehead pressed against Cassian's. You drive me mad. Cassian's lips parted, breath ghosting over his mouth. I'm not the one losing control. You planned this. All of it. Maybe. You wanted to see me like this. I always want to see you, Cassian murmured. At the edge. Darian let out a low, shuddering noise. His mouth moved again, down Cassian's jaw, across his throat. The skin there was soft and still marked from the last time he'd been dragged into a collar. Darian kissed the edge of a bruise. Cassian's breath caught, but still he didn't stop him. Didn't pull away. But his voice remained cool. You know how this ends. No, Darian said against his neck. Not this time. You'll hate yourself tomorrow. I already do. You'll hate me. You're already mine. The sigils flared again. This time, the chandelier above them cracked. Magic rolled off Darian like heat lightning, too raw to control. His pheromones spiraled out, crashing into Cassian's, creating a vortex of scent and sensation and barely bridled power. Cassian's knees buckled slightly. Darian caught him. And still, Cassian didn't push him away. But his words remained sharp. You think this makes me stay? Darian pulled him closer. I think it makes you real. Cassian finally laughed. Low and quiet and bitter. You think I'm fake? I think you only bleed for me. Cassian didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned forward, lips brushing Darian's ear. You know what I smell like? He whispered. You know it drives you mad. You did it on purpose. I do everything on purpose. Darian's hand tightened. You're mine. Cassian kissed the corner of his mouth. No crown in this room, he said. You want control? Darian growled. Cassian grinned. Then earn it. Chapter 9 The Night He Sang Me to Sleep. The Stone Lily Nursery was the oldest building in the eastern wing of Thornhall. Once a home for orphaned noble bastards, now nothing more than a quiet grave of memory. The floors creaked with stories the walls had no mouths to tell, and the windows rattled even without wind. In Darian's mind, the nursery was never silent. It breathed. He remembered the ceiling, cracked in a starburst pattern above his bed. He used to trace it with his eyes at night, pretending it was a constellation only he could name. The scent of damp stone, the chill of wool blankets that never warmed him, and the whispering, always the whispering, of other children. Some of them sobbing too softly to be heard unless you knew what sadness sounded like. He had been 8. The night the fever came. He'd woken gasping, sweat soaking his collar, limbs heavy and boneless. The sheets were twisted around his legs, and his skin felt too tight for his body. The fever had already settled deep, threading heat into his spine. I'm not, he choked. I'm not the prince. They made a mistake. Syl, the old nurse, had not answered. She'd left hours ago, perhaps pretending not to hear the cries. Darian had stumbled from the cot, toes bruising on cold stone, and pressed his back to the corner of the room, clutching his knees to his chest. He was burning. He was drowning. He was 8 years old and alone, and the crown they whispered about felt like a noose. The window cracked open. He remembered the sound. A soft thud as someone dropped inside. He hadn't even looked up, until a voice, low, amused, broke the silence. Is this what you do when you're afraid? Fold in half like a dying flower. Darian blinked through the fever haze. Cassian was already kneeling in front of him. 15, maybe 16 then. All long limbs and longer hair, black as midnight, eyes like storm-colored glass. He wore a high-collared coat, half-buttoned, and a dagger at his hip. There was snow on his boots. "You shouldn't be here," Darian whispered. "No one should." Cassian took off his cloak. He draped it over Darian without asking. The weight of it was immediate, heavy and warm and soaked faintly in pine and metal and something ancient. Magic clung to its hem. Darian gripped it tight. "I'm not the prince," he said. "I'm just some boy they pulled from the riverside. I don't even know who my mother was." "You don't need to." "But I'm not." Cassian leaned forward. His fingers combed lightly through Darian's sweat-drenched hair, brushing it back from his forehead. "You're not who they say you are," he said softly. "You're who you decide to be." Darian's lip trembled. Cassian shifted, pulling him close. He held him against his chest, awkward and imperfect and still too cool to chase away the fever. But Darian leaned into him like he was the only anchor in a world unraveling. "I don't know how to be king." Cassian's mouth tilted. "No one does at first. I think I'm going to die." "Not tonight," Darian cried then. Not loudly. Not the way children cry when they want to be heard. The way they cry when they don't believe anyone is coming. Cassian said nothing. Instead, he began to hum. A tune without words at first, then with them low syllables in a tongue Darian didn't recognize. Ancient, measured, coiled around his thoughts like velvet binding. A spell, a lullaby. He fell asleep with that sound pressed into his ear. The fever broke at dawn. Cassian was gone, but the cloak remained. Now, more than a decade later, that same cloak lay in Darian's lap. He sat curled in the high-backed chair in Cassian's hidden chamber, its air thick with old ash and secrets. The fire in the hearth had gone out. The room smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Cassian stood in the doorway, unmoving. He didn't speak. Darian's hands tightened around the cloak. The fabric still held the shape of his childhood, still carried a trace of Cassian's scent, though fainter now, filtered by years and war and distance that could never quite erase what had been burned into it. "I found it," Darian said quietly, without looking up. "In the old nursery. They sealed it after the plague." Cassian remained silent. Darian looked at the fireless hearth. "They used to say it was haunted, but I think it was just forgotten." A pause. "And you," he added, barely audible, "you used to climb the wall." Cassian exhaled softly. "That was a long time ago." Darian finally looked at him. His face was pale. Too pale. The fever hadn't touched him. But something else had. Something colder. Something deeper. "You sang to me," Darian said. "That night. With words I couldn't understand. It was a spell. Protection." Cassian's eyes flicked to him. "No. Sleep. You knew I'd live?" Cassian didn't answer. Instead, he walked forward, one slow step at a time. When he reached Darian, he didn't kneel, didn't speak. He simply reached down, and without ceremony, adjusted the cloak where it had slipped off Darian's shoulder. He tucked it back around him. Darian didn't move. The hand lingered, for a second, then two. Then Cassian stepped back. "You always knew how to make things worse," Darian murmured. Cassian turned toward the window. His shadow stretched like a scar across the floor. "I was the only one willing to do what was necessary. Even if it destroys me?" Cassian's voice was barely above a whisper. "You were always meant to burn." They sat in silence after that. Neither spoke. Dawn touched the edge of the window, a pale thread of light against the stone. Darian's eyes were open, fixed on the dying embers. Cassian remained standing until they began to fade. When he turned to go, Darian said softly, "That night, you were my light." Cassian's hand paused on the doorframe. He didn't turn. Light burns, he said, and then he left. The cloak slipped from Darian's shoulders, pooling around him like ash. Chapter 10 When the Crown Cracks. The bell of King's Cathedral rang out like a funeral dirge. Each toll echoed across the city's trembling spine, bouncing from spire to spire, cutting through fog and fear alike. The square was packed, nobles in full regalia, clergy in crimson robes, guards flanking every archway. And in the center of it all stood Darian, crown heavy on his brow, cloak damp with sweat at the collar. Behind him, silence. Before him, judgment. And below, just past the golden dais, stood Cassian, clad in midnight black, hair unbound, face expressionless. His violet eyes, unreadable as ever, were fixed on Darian. They hadn't spoken since the night in the East Wing, since the kiss that wasn't forgiveness, since the truth neither of them had voiced. Darian could still feel the ghost of it, the scent of him, the fire. Viral's voice broke through the hush. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone sharp with something both reverent and ravenous. "We cannot wait any longer. The people are frightened. The disease now touches the merchant roads. You know what that means." He paused, but not for permission. "For the safety of the city," he continued. "Cassian Vale must surrender his spirit mark for divine scrutiny." A ripple ran through the crowd. Spirit mark. It was no simple demand. That wasn't interrogation, it was violation. A holy stripping of identity, of will. A dangerous right reserved only for those deemed beyond law. Cassian didn't move. He didn't need to. Viral stepped forward. "This is not vengeance. It is justice. If he has nothing to hide." "He has everything to hide," Darian said. Every head turned. He hadn't raised his voice, but it echoed like thunder. "He has secrets buried in places none of you could comprehend. He's woven into this city's veins. You think to strip him bare and expect the kingdom to survive it." Viral's mouth thinned. "You would protect him even now?" Darian turned slowly, locking eyes with the priest. "He's not mine to protect," he said. "He's my command." Murmurs broke out. Viral's face flushed. "Your command has led to plague, to death." Darian stepped down from the dais. Every step rang on the marble. He walked to where Cassian stood and did not stop until they were a breath apart. Cassian didn't look surprised. He rarely did. Darian's voice dropped to a low growl. "You are not dismissed." Cassian's lips quirked. "Wasn't planning to leave." Viral's voice shook with fury. "You place your trust in a man who won't even defend himself?" "I don't need him to speak," Darian snapped. "I need him to do what no one else here has the spine for." A beat of silence. Then he turned, gaze sweeping the room like a blade. "If any of you wish to challenge that, do so now." No one moved. No one dared. Moonfire Tower had always been too quiet. Built as a royal observatory, it now served a more discreet function. Meetings no one could overhear, decisions no one should witness. Tonight, Darian had dismissed the guards. The tower felt hollow. Like him, Cassian leaned against one of the glass-paned windows, moonlight casting his features in an eerie silver wash. He looked less like a man and more like a statue of something beautiful, ancient, and vengeful. Darian sat with his head bowed. A flask of wine rested forgotten on the floor. Neither had spoken since returning from the cathedral. When he finally did, Darian's voice was nearly gone. "You stood there." Cassian didn't respond. "You stood there and let them damn you." Cassian's fingers tapped once against the sill. "I told you once," he murmured. "You'd need to choose what to sacrifice." Darian raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, and for the first time in weeks, the shadow beneath them looked less like power and more like fatigue. "I thought you meant the nobles, or the priests, or my name." Cassian turned. "I meant me." Darian stood abruptly, staggered slightly, then caught himself on the edge of the table. I'm tired of covering for you. I never asked you to. I'm tired, Darian said again, slower, of standing between you and the storm. Cassian stepped forward. He didn't offer to help, but he came close enough that Darian could feel the heat of his body. You think I leave the damage for you to clean, Cassian said quietly. But I do it so you don't have to bloody your hands. You think I care about blood? You care about looking clean. Darian exhaled, sharp and pained. Why won't you tell me what you're doing? Because you'd try to stop me. I wouldn't. You would. I wouldn't, Darian whispered. If you just told me the truth. Cassian didn't answer. He reached for the wine, took a sip, and winced. Too bitter. He poured the rest into the fire. The flames hissed. Darian watched the embers dance, then slowly sat again, his arms wrapped around himself. After a while, Cassian crossed the room. He didn't sit, but he crouched beside Darian, eyes level. His voice softened. You're cracking. I'm holding. You're fraying. I'm still king. You won't be if you break. Darian's throat worked. Then, all at once, he slumped forward. His head hit Cassian's shoulder, and his hands clutched fistfuls of Cassian's tunic, the motion too desperate to be rehearsed. Cassian stilled. Don't leave me to fix this alone, Darian murmured. You set the fires. I'm the one left in the ash. Cassian closed his eyes. He didn't hug him, but he placed a hand on his back and rubbed slow circles, like one might soothe a beast too wild to name. When? He asked softly. Will you learn to stand without leaning? Darian didn't answer. He was shaking. From exhaustion. From want. From the impossible task of loving a man who only ever handed him knives. An hour later, Cassian stood alone by the window again. He watched the streetlights blink across the hills of the sleeping city. The moon had waned to a blade. His own reflection stared back at him in the glass, hair tousled, shoulder damp where Darian had buried his face. He whispered to no one, If you'd killed me earlier, this never would have spread. Outside, across the rooftops of the merchant ward, a shape moved. Low, feral, a glimmer of silver fangs beneath sickly fur. It leapt from one stone ledge to another, unseen. The infection had grown teeth, and Cassian had led it. Chapter 11, Bite me, brand me, be my king. The doors to the bloodroot bathing chamber slammed shut with a boom that echoed through the stone halls like the heartbeat of something monstrous. Darian didn't wait for the silence to settle. His hands were already twisted in the front of Cassian's coat, dragging him through steam that smelled faintly of iron, wet stone, and lingering heat. The room had been dormant until minutes ago. Now it pulsed with raw energy. Hot mist clung to every surface, rising from the enchanted pools sunk into the black marble floor. Thick veins of red coral glowed beneath the water, casting the chamber in a sinister, throbbing light. Cassian didn't resist. He let Darian shove him back, let the force of it slam his spine against one of the bath's carved pillars, water sloshing at their feet. Darian's face hovered inches from his. You've been playing me, he hissed. Cassian blinked once, lashes wet. Have I? You know what your scent does to me. You're the king. Control yourself. You laced it, Darian snarled. You wanted me to snap. Cassian said nothing. Instead, he reached up. His fingers found the edge of his collar and tugged it loose. The fabric slipped. And there, just at the edge of his collarbone, was the mark. Faint, pale now, but visible. Teeth had broken skin. And not gently. Darian froze. His breath hitched audibly. Cassian's voice dropped to a purr. You already did, didn't you? Darian's hand flew to the mark before he could stop himself, thumb grazing it with a reverent sort of violence. Say something, he whispered. Cassian didn't. He tilted his head instead. exposing his throat. It was an offering, provocation, an execution sentence. Darian snapped. His information scent burst out of him in a wave, saturating the air. The magic in the steam reacted instantly. Sigils along the ceiling flared red, then cracked, unable to contain the surge. The temperature spiked. Cassian didn't move, didn't flinch. He stood there as Darian shoved him back against the pillar with enough force to shake loose fragments of old mortar. One of Darian's hands pinned his chest. The other clawed down, dragging at the exposed skin of Cassian's neck like he could erase the line between threat and desire. "You shouldn't do this," Cassian said, voice like velvet over glass. "I can't stop. You're too close." "Then push me away." Cassian's eyes narrowed. He didn't. Darian leaned in. Their lips met like the collision of storms, open mouths, wet heat, desperation clashing with a violence so visceral it left both panting. Cassian bit him first. Not deep, just enough. Darian responded by biting back, harder, until their mouths tasted like copper and salt and want. "You think this gives you power?" Cassian murmured. "You think if you take me now, you'll own me?" "No," Darian rasped. "I think I already do." He grabbed Cassian's jaw, forcing his head back, and lowered his mouth to the pulse point above his gland. Cassian stilled. For one heartbeat, two. Then he arched, his neck exposed further, his hands fisting at his sides. Darian's scent flooded him, their auras tangled, magic spiking in volatile rhythm. The stone beneath their feet trembled. The red light from the water pulsed like a heartbeat, faster and faster. Cassian's breath hitched. He whispered, "If you're going to mark me." Darian's teeth grazed his skin. "Do it like you mean it." And Darian did. He bit down, hard, not deep enough to claim, but enough to bridge the chasm between madness and mating. The bond snapped into place like lightning across wet stone, raw and unstable and perfect in its imperfection. Cassian gasped. For the first time, truly gasped. And in the next breath, he broke it. His hand came up. He bit down on his own wrist, severing the connection in a flood of blood and pain and severed magic. The backlash hit them both. Darian reeled back, crashing to the floor. The scent in the room twisted, cut off mid-climax. The magic sizzled, then died. Cassian slumped against the pillar. He didn't look at Darian, didn't speak, just watched the blood from his wrist drip onto the steaming floor, drop by drop by drop. Darian curled in on himself, still on the ground, panting like he'd been drowning. His voice cracked. "I'm losing it." Cassian's voice came low, breathless but even. "You already did." Darian's fingers dug into his hair. "I can't." "You can't control it?" "I can't lose you." Cassian finally looked at him. His eyes weren't cold, but they were unrelenting. "You don't get to keep me and stay sane." Darian blinked up at him. "You're saying I have to choose?" Cassian nodded once. "Want me?" he asked, stepping forward. "Or want to kill me? You can't have both." Darian didn't answer. Not right away. Cassian crouched beside him. His blood still dripped between them. "Next time," he whispered. "When you bite, don't hesitate." Darian looked at him like he didn't recognize his own reflection anymore. Cassian stood, turned, and walked into the steam. Miles beneath the palace, a sound cracked through stone. In the lowest sanctum of the forbidden hall, the runes along the edge of the Eshkur seal shimmered, then fractured. A black vein of smoke oozed through the widening gap, hissing as it touched open air. The seal, once unbreakable, pulsed once. Then again. The infection had reached the source, and the countdown had begun. Chapter 12: The Night the Wolf First Killed. The Snowvale outpost stood on the last ridge of the northern range, a crown of frost and blood above the rest of the kingdom. Wind howled against its stone ramparts like wolves mourning old gods, and the snow never stopped, not truly. It layered the mountainside in silence, burying everything too slow to survive. Darian had been 12 when Cassian first took him there. A training tour, the court called it. A week in the wild to toughen the young heir. But it had been more than that. Cassian hadn't brought guards. Hadn't brought servants. Just the two of them and a pair of snow-bred stallions. One tent, one fire, and a dagger Cassian placed in Darian's palm on the first night without a word. He didn't know then what it meant. By the third night he would. They'd taken a narrow path up the eastern ridge, overlooking the frozen lake. Darian remembered the way the ice glimmered below, so pale it looked like bone. The wind had kicked up snow devils between the pines. Cassian walked ahead, his cloak billowing behind him like a second shadow. Darian had just started to complain about the cold when Cassian froze. One hand lifted, a silent command. Darian stopped breathing. Then the world broke. A shape dropped from the ridge above, hooded, fast, steel glinting. Darian saw the blade before he saw the face. "Down," Cassian ordered. The assassin moved for Darian. Cassian intercepted. There was no hesitation, no threat or warning, just motion, the hiss of a blade unsheathing, the sound of flesh being torn. The attacker never even made it to the ground. Cassian had driven his dagger up beneath the ribcage, right to the hilt. Blood splattered across the snow, brilliant and steaming. Darian didn't move. The warmth hit his cheek first, then the copper tang. Took him a full 3 seconds to realize what had happened. Cassian let the body fall, and turned. His face was blank, unbothered. The way wolves look after a kill. Darian stared at him, then at the blood on his hands. He vomited. Later that night he didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't even blink when Cassian stripped the corpse, burned it, and buried the ashes in a shallow grave beneath a tree. When Cassian returned to the tent, Darian was curled in the corner, eyes glassy. "You were almost killed today," Cassian said simply. Darian didn't answer. Cassian knelt. "You'll get used to it." "I don't want to." "You will." "I don't want to," Darian repeated, voice cracking. "I don't want to be like you." Cassian stared at him a long moment. Then, slowly, he undid the clasps on his coat. He draped it over Darian's shaking shoulders. "You'll still have to live." Darian turned away. He didn't cry. Not then. But his body shook from the cold. Or maybe something colder. Cassian lay beside him that night. Not close, but close enough that Darian could feel his presence in the space between them. As the wind howled through the canvas, Cassian hummed under his breath. The same old lullaby in a language that wrapped around Darian's mind like fur. He'd heard it before. It always worked. Eventually, he whispered, "If you weren't here, I'd be dead." Cassian didn't speak. Instead, he reached over, covered Darian's eyes with his hand, and said nothing more. By morning, the snow had buried the site of the kill. But Darian would never forget. The present was colder than memory. Even within the safety of Silverthorn's eastern wing, the wind tonight seeped in like guilt. Darian sat alone at the window, wrapped in the same coat Cassian had given him years ago. It no longer fit right. The seams were tight across his shoulders. The sleeves barely reached his wrists. He didn't take it off. Below, the city glimmered under moonlight. Peaceful. But not really. Nothing had been peaceful since that night. He could still smell the blood some days. Still see the way Cassian had moved. Silent, precise, merciless. That had been the moment, hadn't it? The real beginning. Not the palace games, not the council meetings, not even the crown. That was the night he knew Cassian would kill for him, and that he'd never belong to anyone else. He pressed his forehead to the cold stone. Footsteps. He didn't look up, but he didn't have to. Cassian's shadow stretched long across the room, cast by the flickering candlelight. He didn't speak. He rarely did when Darian was like this, lost in thought, buried under the weight of memory. Darian's voice came soft. "Do you still remember it?" Cassian didn't answer. Darian turned his head, eyes catching on the curve of Cassian's jaw, the gleam of his eyes, too bright in the dark. "You sang to me," Darian said. "The night I couldn't sleep. The night after you." He trailed off. Cassian didn't move. The silence stretched. Darian swallowed. "Would you still sing for me?" he asked, barely louder than a breath. "If I asked now?" A pause. Then Cassian said, "If you heard it again, you wouldn't come back from it." Darian turned fully now. His expression was raw, stripped of royal steel. "Maybe I don't want to come back." Cassian's gaze softened, just a fraction, then hardened again. He walked to the table, picked up the lantern, and moved to the door. As he passed, he paused just long enough for the light to catch the scar on his wrist, the one he'd bitten through to sever the bond. Darian stared at it. Cassian didn't explain, didn't excuse. At the door, he paused again. Then, almost inaudible, he murmured, "I never stopped singing." Then he was gone. Outside, far below the palace, in the deepest corridor of the sealed dungeons, something howled. Not from pain, from hunger, the kind of hunger that no lullaby could soothe. Chapter 13. The blood on his orders. The scent of blood still lingered in the execution garden. Not the kind that faded with rain, the kind that etched itself into stone, into the marrow of those who'd stood close enough to hear the final breath escape a traitor's lungs, or a loyalist's, depending on who told the story. They called it the Thornblood Massacre by midday. 3 noble corpses left twisted on the steps of the sacrificial altar, hands bound in blackthorn chains. One with his eyes still open, frozen in horror. One headless, one burned from the inside out, a spell Cassian had rarely used in public before. Darian wasn't told until after. By then, the ashes had already been swept, but the whispers ran rampant through the war corridors like rats in a grain vault. Thorn, ever loyal, was the one who slammed the doors open. His armor bore the scratches of fresh battle, no, not battle, restraint. It had taken 6 soldiers to hold him back from throwing himself at the guards who executed his uncle. Darian didn't rise from the war table. "Where is he?" he asked. "In the chamber," Thorn said, voice frayed and trembling. "Sitting on the edge of your goddamn map." Darian stood. He didn't bother with ceremony. When he entered the war room, the scent hit first. Metal, smoke, blood. Cassian sat on the table itself, legs crossed, gloves half off. His fingers were stained dark, dried blood smudged beneath his nails. No shame, no apology. "You sent them to die," Darian said. Cassian looked up. "I gave them what they were owed. They were on my side. They weren't on mine." Darian walked slowly across the room. "Do you know what you've done?" "Yes." Thorn's uncle was old, loud, dangerous. "You think dangerous is enough to justify murder?" Cassian shrugged. "It's enough for me." Darian's hands slammed the edge of the table, making the ink jars jump. "You killed my allies." "No," Cassian leaned forward. "I killed my obstacles." "You have no right." "I have your crown seal," Cassian cut in. "You gave it to me. Or did you forget?" Darian stared at him, breath heaving. Cassian didn't blink. He reached for a silk cloth and began wiping his hands, slow and meticulous, like the blood was nothing more than spilled wine. "They were traitors." "They weren't. They would have turned on you." "You're the one turning on me." That stopped Cassian for a moment. His eyes flicked up. Something cold shifted there. "Is that what you believe?" Darian stepped back, breath ragged. "I don't know what I believe anymore." Cassian stood, walked toward him, not fast, but without hesitation. When he reached him, he leaned in, too close. His voice was a whisper against Darian's skin. "Do you want to bury me now?" Darian froze. Cassian's breath ghosted against his neck. "You could," he murmured. "Put a sword through my chest. Have your guards drag me to the gallows. Everyone would cheer. You'd sleep easier." Darian's voice cracked. "Stop." Cassian's fingers ghosted over Darian's wrist. "Or do you want to press me into the dirt and make me yours again?" "Stop." "Which do you want, your majesty?" Cassian's mouth brushed his ear. "To own me, or to destroy me?" Darian's hands clenched. He shoved Cassian away. Hard. Cassian stumbled back a step, lips twitching, not in amusement, in something darker. "You're shaking again," he said. "I should kill you." "Do it." "I should." Cassian tilted his head. "But you won't." Viral burst in without knocking. Behind him, half the council. The war room exploded in shouts. Demands. Accusations. "Your Majesty!" Viral thundered. 3 members of the council dead. Without trial, by your own regent's hand. If you allow this, if you defend this, then the throne is stained beyond salvation. "He's crossed every line of reason," cried another lord. "He must be stripped of power, exiled at the very least." Cassian didn't flinch at any of it. Darian didn't speak. He stood in the center of the room, crown heavy on his brow, watching it all unfold. And for the first time he felt not anger, but uncertainty. Was Cassian protecting him? Or was Cassian simply removing everyone who dared claim him? When the voices reached a crescendo, Darian raised a hand. The room fell silent. "I need time," he said. "Time." Viral looked ready to explode. "Your Majesty, my word is final." He turned, left, and didn't look back. Night fell heavy. Darian sat alone in the throne room, the hall lit only by moonlight slanting through the stained glass. Cassian's sword lay on the step below him, where he'd thrown it after the war room. Blood still coated the hilt. Darian stared at it. His fingers reached out, almost reverent. He traced the blade. It gleamed. He whispered to no one, "If he does it again." The edge caught a sliver of his skin. A drop of blood slid down his fingertip. "I'll kill him." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if the ache in his chest meant rage or heartbreak. Far below the palace, in the sealed crypt of Ishkur, the black fissure widened another inch. No one heard the whisper that followed, but Cassian did. Wherever he was, he lifted his head and smiled. Chapter 14: The King Who Wanted to Kill Him. The armory in the East Tower had not been used for ceremonial practice in years. The air was stale with oil and iron, lined with swords polished to a deadly gleam, each one a legacy of some past war, some long-dead king. The flickering torchlight made the steel glint like ice. Cassian stepped inside as summoned, footsteps echoing along the stone floor. His coat was half-buttoned, his hair still damp from the rain, falling in wet ink black waves over his shoulders. The first thing he saw was the blade, not sheathed, not hanging, drawn, held, and aimed at his chest. Darian stood with both hands wrapped around the hilt, jaw clenched, blue eyes devoid of expression. Only his knuckles trembled. Cassian's gaze dropped to the tip of the blade, pressed just over his sternum. His smile was slow. "You finally made up your mind?" The words sliced the silence like a second weapon. Darian didn't answer. Cassian took a step forward. The sword pressed in, not quite enough to break skin, but close. "I killed your loyalists," Cassian murmured. "Broke your counsel. Undermined your rule. What are you waiting for?" Darian's voice cracked like glass. "You want me to kill you. I want you to choose. You bastard." Darian's hands trembled harder. "You planned this. Every word. Every murder. Also, I'd be the one to end you. Cassian's smile deepened. He unfastened his coat and let it fall to the floor. The exposed skin beneath was pale, smooth, the faint edges of the old whip scars barely visible under the dim torchlight. He stepped closer. Darian didn't back away. Cassian pressed his chest to the tip of the blade. "Come on, Your Majesty," he whispered. "Do it. Put it right through me." Darian's breath came in ragged bursts. The blade wavered. Cassian tilted his head. "Is this the part where you tell me how much I've hurt you? How I'm your burden, your shame, your madness wrapped in skin?" Darian lunged, but not with the sword. He dropped it. His hands slammed Cassian back into the wall, and the kiss that followed was violent, wet, broken, desperate. It wasn't affection. It wasn't even anger. It was pure collapse. Cassian didn't kiss him back. Not at first. He let Darian claw at him, bite at his lower lip hard enough to draw blood. He didn't flinch when the taste hit Darian's tongue, or when Darian broke the kiss only to whisper against his mouth, trembling, "What the hell am I supposed to do with you?" Cassian's hands came up at last. They didn't push. They cradled Darian's face, thumbs brushing tears from his cheeks even as his mouth stayed dry and cool. "Keep going," he said softly. "You're almost convincing." Darian groaned. It wasn't pleasure. It wasn't quite pain. He kissed him again, and again, each time harder, like he could make sense of this with bruises and blood. His scent bloomed in the air, sharp, sweet, desperate. The response from Cassian was slow, but not absent. His own information pulse followed, darker, deeper like wildfire under ice, curled around Darian's, fanged and smoky. Their auras collided in the narrow room, rattling the weapons on the walls, shivering the steel in its mounts. Darian's hand slid down Cassian's chest. His fingers pressed over the spot where the blade had almost gone. Cassian's breath hitched, then stilled. "You want to destroy me," he whispered. Darian leaned in, forehead pressed to his. "I want to forget you. You won't. I want to own you. You never could. I want you to stop." Cassian's voice came low. "But you won't ask me to." Darian slammed him into the wall again, hand tangled in his hair, their bodies flush, slick with heat and fury. "I should kill you," he said. Cassian's smile was a breath against his cheek. "You almost mean that this time. You're mine. Then act like it." Their auras snapped together. Magic burst outward in a low-pitched hum, vibrating the stone beneath their feet. Cassian finally moved, just a little, pressing his mouth to Darian's jaw, to his pulse. "You're better like this," he said. "When you stop pretending you have control." Darian's chest heaved. His hands slid down to Cassian's hips. He didn't push. He didn't pull. He just stayed there, head buried in the crook of Cassian's neck, breathing, sobbing once, silently. Cassian didn't say anything, didn't taunt, just stood still while the king shook in his arms. When Darian finally pulled back, face still streaked with wet, he looked at him like he'd never seen him before. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was raw. Cassian stared at him, then slowly leaned in. He licked the last trace of blood from Darian's mouth, and whispered, "I want you to be cruel." The throne room was empty when Darian returned. He walked in silence, sword forgotten somewhere in the tower behind him. He stood at the center of the room, the moon casting pale patterns across the floor, and looked at nothing. His hand lifted once, fingers brushing the place where Cassian's scent still clung to his collar. He didn't sit on the throne. He stood behind it, one hand on its crown, as if bracing for a storm. Far below, in the sealed prison of Ishkur, the great sigil cracked straight down the center. Black smoke drifted through the fracture, and in the shadows, something with too many eyes opened them all. Chapter 15, The Oath Beneath His Teeth. The ring had never truly fit. Darian remembered that first, above all else, the way the metal felt too large for his hand, too heavy for his blood. He'd stared at it under the flickering candlelight of the secret prayer room, palms damp, chest tight with something like nausea. He had been 11. Cassian had just turned 16. The room smelled like old parchment and incense, stone walls lined with silent statues of past kings. Their eyes had been carved to gaze upward, toward something divine, but all Darian felt was their collective judgment. The ring sat in a black silk box, unadorned, but it pulsed with old magic, power, history, fear. "Put it on," Cassian said. Darian didn't move. The silence stretched, deepened. Even the candles seemed to burn quieter. "I don't want it," Darian finally whispered. Cassian raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Darian looked down. "Because they'll hate me." Cassian didn't answer at first. Then he took the ring and held it between his teeth. Darian blinked. "What are you?" Cassian moved fast. He grabbed Darian's wrist, forced his hand open, and before the boy could flinch, bit down into his palm hard enough to break skin. Blood welled, bright and immediate. Darian gasped, then cried out, "You!" Cassian shoved the ring into the bleeding flesh. Not gently, not symbolically, but like he meant to weld it to him. Darian flailed, tears streaking down his cheeks. "That hurts." Cassian leaned in close, so close Darian could smell the iron on his breath. "Good," he said, voice quiet, "because ruling does." Darian stared at him, trembling. Cassian let go. Blood dripped down Darian's fingers, trailing across his wrist, staining the black robe of a boy meant to become king. "You don't want them to hate you?" Cassian said. "I let them fear you instead." Darian collapsed to the floor, clutching his hand. And the ring remained, buried in blood, branded into him not by choice, but by something harder, colder. Cassian had kissed his forehead then, brief, like sealing a spell. "You'll thank me later," he whispered. Darian never did. But he never took the ring off either. Years later, the ring still sat on his hand. But now it fit perfectly. Outside, the southern balcony of Silverthorn Palace was silent but for the hush of the wind threading through the towers. The moon hung low and fat, casting everything in bone-white relief. Cassian sat on the edge of the balustrade, legs dangling into the dark, a bottle of something sharp in one hand. He didn't look up when Darian approached. He just said, "Thirsty?" Darian sat beside him without answering. Cassian handed him the bottle. They drank in silence for a long time. Beneath them the city gleamed, quiet for now, but not safe, never safe. The kind of quiet that came before a scream. Cassian finally spoke. "You haven't punished me for the blood." Darian tilted his head back. "Maybe I'm tired of punishing you." Cassian smiled, slow and not entirely kind. "No, you're not. You just don't know which part of me to cut off first." Darian turned the bottle in his hands. "I don't want to cut you at all." "Liar." Darian looked at him. Really looked. The wind caught Cassian's hair, making the black waves dance around his face. In the moonlight, he looked carved from shadow and flame. His violet eyes were half-lidded, but still gleaming with something wicked. "I think," Darian said slowly, "you were right that night, in the prayer room." Cassian took another drink. "About what?" Darian held up his hand. The ring caught the light. "They don't hate me anymore." Cassian nodded. "No, they fear me." Cassian's voice dropped. "And that's what keeps you alive. Was that your goal? Always?" Cassian didn't answer. Darian turned to face him. "You said I'd thank you later. You haven't." "No." Cassian smirked. "Then don't." They sat again in silence. Until Darian said, "I still don't understand you." Cassian didn't laugh, but the corner of his mouth twitched. I don't want to be understood. You're the only person Cassian cut him off. Don't finish that sentence. Why? Because if you say you need me again, I might make you prove it. Darian's hand flexed. The ring felt like a brand tonight. He looked at Cassian again. Will I really kill you one day? Cassian finally looked back and smiled. Not cold this time, not cruel, just inevitable. Yes, he said. And when you do, you'll get all of me. Darian didn't answer. Couldn't. His hand brushed Cassian's as he passed the bottle back. Cassian didn't move away. In the distance, thunder rolled. And deep beneath the city, something ancient stirred in its cage. Chapter 16, The Teeth That Nearly Tore. Power made Cassian cruel. Not in the overt way that tyrants were cruel, but in the slow, deliberate way he peeled skin from truth and let it rot in the open. There were no grand proclamations from his mouth. No declarations. Only quiet, exacting judgment. He didn't sit in the council chamber like a man under fire. He sat like the fire. Syl watched from the edge of the room, half hidden behind the draped columns, as yet another noble was dragged before him. Lord Varn, silver-bearded and red-eyed, once loyal, now cornered by too many choices and too few allies. Cassian stood, motionless, gloved hands folded behind his back, a black ink smear against the gold of the high chamber. His voice was velvet and razors. You smuggled food into the infected quarter without clearance. Varn choked. They were starving. Children. You exposed them to unstable magic. The children are now corpses. That's not. You do not speak over me. Varn collapsed to his knees. Cassian tilted his head. Execution or exile? No trial. You confessed. I didn't. Execution, then. Darian didn't say a word. He sat in the king's seat, one hand limp on the armrest, crown crooked on his head, blue eyes blank. He'd spoken exactly twice during the entire session. Neither time had he looked at Cassian. Not directly, but he watched. Every motion, every glance, every breath, like a wolf too exhausted to chase the deer, but still hungry enough to watch it bleed. The sun had set long before Darian entered Cassian's study. He didn't knock, didn't make a sound, just pushed open the door, shut it behind him, and slid the lock with a low click. Cassian didn't turn from where he stood by the desk, ink drying on his fingers. You're late, he said softly. Darian didn't reply. He walked forward, steady, slow. Each step closer until the scent of parchment and ash gave way to the deeper scent, violet smoke and iron. Cassian. Darian stopped just behind him. You've been avoiding me. Cassian moved only to unroll a new scroll. You've been busy, ruling, brooding, gnashing teeth behind your lovely crown. Darian reached for his shoulder. Cassian turned before he could touch. Their eyes met. Darian's were dark. Cassian's were calm, until Darian's hand slid around his neck and pulled him forward. Don't avoid me, Darian whispered. Don't make me chase you. Cassian didn't flinch. Is that a command? No, Darian breathed. It's a plea. Cassian's eyes narrowed slightly. I don't answer to pleas. Darian slammed him against the bookshelf. Cassian didn't cry out, but his breath hitched. Their mouths were close now, breath warm and shared. Darian's voice dropped to a growl. You make me mad. You make me insane. You think I can't feel it every time you walk away like I'm nothing? You are the king. And you are my ruin, Darian snarled. Then he bit him. Not gently, not teasingly. His teeth sank into Cassian's shoulder, through the fabric, through flesh. Blood welled instantly, the scent of it sharp and hot. Cassian's breath caught. His hands gripped Darian's arms, not to push away, but to steady. Darian's teeth stayed there, clenched, shaking. He could feel it, almost the urge to rip, to tear, to punish. He didn't. His mouth trembled, then released. The blood stained his lips. Cassian's breath came shallow now, but his voice remained unbroken. Almost, he whispered, fingers brushing the back of Darian's neck. You almost meant it. Darian staggered back. His hands were slick with blood. Cassian's. Cassian reached up, peeled the collar from his skin, and let the air hit the wound. You wanted to kill me, didn't you? Darian fell to his knees. His chest heaved. I do want to kill you, he said hoarsely. Every time I see your face. Every time you lie to me with your silence. Cassian sank to the floor beside him, gingerly. The pain in his shoulder didn't show on his face. Only heat. Only quiet, gleaming heat in his eyes. You don't lie well. I will kill you, Darian whispered again. Someday. Cassian reached for him, tilted his chin upward, and smiled faintly, then stopped, just biting. Their mouths met again, but this time softer, slower, tasting. Not love, not forgiveness. Need. The kind that danced at the edge of violence. Cassian pulled back first, blood still slick at his throat. You want to control me? He asked. Darian didn't move. Cassian licked the corner of his mouth where blood still lingered. Then be cruel enough to own me. Their auras brushed. Only brushed. Just enough for Darian's heart to stutter in his chest. Then Cassian broke the link with a flick of his magic. The silence that followed was raw. Darian rested his head against Cassian's good shoulder. Fingers tangled in the black of his shirt. They sat like that on the floor of the study, between books and blood and breath. I really will kill you, Darian murmured once more. Cassian's voice came like smoke. I hope you do. Chapter 17 The Fever He Never Fought. The stone lily garden hadn't changed in 10 years. Even under moonlight, Darian could trace every vine, every crooked brick, every blade of frost-stiffened grass from memory. He stood in the shadows of the old courtyard now, crown tilted, cloak loose around his shoulders, as if drawn there by instinct. He hadn't stepped foot here in years. Not since the first time he thought he'd die. Not since Cassian saved him with hands colder than death, and a voice that never shook. It had started with a cough. Then the tremors came. Then heat. Bone deep. Well, at 10 years old, Darian had collapsed in the audience chamber, burning with fever. Most thought it was exhaustion. Too many hours pretending to be air. Too many lessons drilled by venom-tongued courtiers who loved his bloodline more than his person. The healers said he needed quiet. The nobles said he needed discipline. So they shut him in the back room of the stone lily garden, small, stone-walled, windowless, and let him sweat out his sins alone. Cassian hadn't been allowed inside. He wasn't heir. He wasn't kin. He was just the Omega ward of the old king's will, a boy with silver-spun lies behind his lashes and knives in his tongue. But he came anyway. The guards didn't see him. He was too fast, and too quiet. The first thing Darian remembered when the door cracked open was the cool sweep of fingers against his cheek. Then a sharp splash. Then pain, as Cassian forced the bitter draft down his throat and held his mouth shut so he couldn't spit it out. Darian had cried, but Cassian didn't stop. Stop fighting. He hissed, voice unshaking even when his hands trembled. You want to die here? Choking on your own heat? I can't breathe. Then breathe slower. It hurts. Then stay awake long enough for it to pass. Darian sobbed. In a haze, he clutched the edge of Cassian's coat, fists balled with childlike desperation. Am I gonna die? Cassian paused. The water bowl in his hands shook slightly, then stilled. No. Darian blinked. Cassian's voice dropped lower. You haven't learned how to be cruel yet. The boy frowned through the sweat and haze. What does that? Cassian wrung out the cloth, wiped his forehead. Kings who die too young die soft. You're not soft. Not if I can help it. I feel soft. Cassian smirked. You feel pathetic. I do. But you're not. Darian's vision flickered. Before it went black again, he whispered, Will you stay? Cassian didn't answer. But when Darian woke the next time, the fever broken and the sheets clinging to him like dried salt, the window had been cracked open to let in the frost. And Cassian was there, asleep, sitting in the windowsill, arms folded, head leaning back against the stone, wearing Darian's royal outer cloak. It was far too big for him, and yet, somehow, made him look taller. Now, all these years later, Darian stood in the same garden. The same breeze swept the courtyard, just as cold. But the fire in his chest was worse. Not a fever now, not illness, just the burn of something he still hadn't learned to name. Cassian was elsewhere tonight, briefed the war council, vanished before Darian could say anything. As always, as if he knew when Darian needed him and refused him out of principle or cruelty. Darian sat down on the same bench he'd recovered on as a boy, folded his arms. The stars spun slow above him. Somewhere in the dark of his chambers, Syl had laid out the old cloak, the one Cassian had once borrowed. He hadn't worn it since. It still smelled like a past that had no language. He'd burned for Cassian since that night, not just with want, but with the memory of safety, of warmth, of someone who'd walked through palace stone and tradition just to shove bitter herbs down his throat and tell him to live. How ironic that the one who saved him from fire now fed it. He went home to the south wing alone that night. The old cloak waited folded at the edge of his bed. He picked it up, held it in his lap, ran his fingers over the hem. I told you I'd die without you, he murmured. And now you're the one setting the pyre. No answer, only silence, the kind that belonged to men who knew exactly when to disappear. But the warmth of the memory didn't fade. The hand that once held him down so he wouldn't choke. He pressed the cloak to his chest. You said you'd wait until I was cruel enough. His voice cracked. Am I cruel enough now, Cassian? The window blew open with the wind, and somewhere below the palace, something old stirred in its bindings. Chapter 18, the one he couldn't break. Silverthorn's war room was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that settled after something had already been torn apart. Darian sat at the head of the long obsidian table, hands clenched so tightly they looked bloodless, the burn of shame crawling up his spine. Dozens of nobles had spoken, half in anger, half in fear, all with eyes fixed on the empty space where Cassian should have been. But Cassian wasn't there, because Darian had sent him away. Cassian Vale, former High Chancellor of the Realm, war strategist, shadow of the crown, now officially relieved of duties for the duration of review. It sounded reasonable, sounded clean, but Darian had never felt filthier in his life. He found Cassian in the West Tower later that evening. The tower was rarely used, sealed after the last lunar war, filled with moth-bitten tapestries and the scent of old secrets. Cassian was leaning against the window arch, coat half unbuttoned, collar loose. His shirt glowed pale in the moonlight, hair loose around his face like shadowed silk. You look like you came to apologize, Cassian said without turning. Darian's mouth tightened. I didn't. Of course not. Kings don't apologize. You made me look weak. Cassian turned now slowly. His expression wasn't angry. It was something worse. Amused. You think I care how you look? I care, Darian snapped. They're turning on me, Viral, Thorn, the entire southern wing. They've always been turning on you, Cassian said coolly. I just made sure you never felt it. You're not listening. No, you're not saying anything worth listening to. Darian strode forward. He was taller now than Cassian by a hair, broader in the shoulders, heavy in presence, but Cassian, as always, made the air bend around him. Made Darian feel 17 again and furious. I stripped you of rank in front of half the council, and you didn't say a word. Not a protest. Not a flicker. Cassian's violet eyes glittered. Would you have preferred I begged? I would have preferred a reason. One damn reason why you won't just do what I ask without destroying everything. Cassian stepped forward, sudden. His fingers caught Darian's chin, tilting it up hard enough to make his breath catch. Do you want a reason? He said lowly. Or do you want control? Darian flinched. Cassian leaned in. Because if it's the latter, darling, you'd better learn how to bite harder. The heat between them cracked like a whip. Darian grabbed his wrist, shoved him back, but not far. He didn't want distance. He wanted blood. You think this is a game? He hissed. You think you can burn half my kingdom and I'll just watch? Cassian's mouth quirked. You have been. Darian struck first. His hands fisted in Cassian's shirt, dragged him forward, and slammed him against the cold stone wall. The impact rattled dust from the beams, the entire tower groaning like it remembered the weight of war. You belong to me, Darian growled. You said it once. In the old cathedral. You said you were mine. Cassian's laugh was breathless. I said I'd serve the crown. You are the crown, Darian snapped. You're every thorn in it. His lips crushed against Cassian's. It wasn't tender. It wasn't soft. It was a challenge wrapped in desperation. Cassian didn't resist. He leaned in, deepened the kiss, but the angle was off, sharp, biting. Their teeth clashed. Cassian's mouth opened, and Darian's tongue met blood. Not his. Not this time. Cassian's hand slid down his spine, pressed into the small of his back, pulling their bodies flush. Their scents collided, Darian's heat and cedar, Cassian's smoke and moonroot. The air warped around them, pressure spiking. You shouldn't let them see you like this, Cassian murmured, voice brushing Darian's ear. All claw and cry. I don't care. You care too much. Then make me stop. Cassian's grip tightened. Their glands slid against each other's necks, heat spiking, pheromones boiling to the surface. A snap of magic flared, lighting runes on the wall that hadn't glowed in decades. Darian moaned. Low, soft, almost shamed. He buried his face in Cassian's shoulder, grinding down like he could erase the need between them. I don't want anyone else to look at you, he whispered. Cassian stilled. Then he said, Then you should have marked me. Darian bit him. No warning. Just sank his teeth into the curve of Cassian's throat. Too high to count as real, too low to be meaningless. Cassian hissed, but didn't stop him. His hands fisted in Darian's hair, holding him there. For a heartbeat, they were wolves, teeth and fire, rage and ache. Then Cassian pulled back. Slowly, deliberately, he placed a hand over Darian's chest and pushed, not hard, but hard enough to break the link. Magic hissed and died. Darian gasped, breath punched out of him, hands clutching at nothing. Why? He whispered. Cassian leaned in again, lips brushing the blood from Darian's lower lip. Because you're not ready. I am. You're not cruel enough. Cassian pressed 2 fingers to his mouth. Shoo, he said. Darian froze. Then his knees buckled. They slid down the wall together, breath tangled, hearts still beating too fast. Darian clung to him, still trembling, still burning, still unable to win. Cassian wrapped an arm around him, held him there, as if he hadn't just ruined him all over again. Darian's voice cracked. You're the only one I can't break. Cassian smiled and kissed his temple. Good. Far below the tower, deep in the vaults beneath the palace, the seal pulsed once, then cracked. A whisper of black light licked up the warding circle, and for the first time in 100 years, Ashkur twitched and watched. Chapter 19. His eyes were not his own. The candlelight flickered once in Cassian's study before extinguishing itself, though no wind touched it. Darian noticed. He always noticed the quiet things now. The way shadows curled a little too long around the corners of rooms Cassian had just left. The way the air in hallways turned colder when Cassian passed through. The way his voice, always smooth, always unshakable, had started to stutter at odd intervals. Glitches in a machine that had never broken. But today was different. Today Cassian hadn't even spoken. He'd walked into the underground war chamber, where only the High Council met, where magic thrummed through every flagstone, without greeting, without nod. His fingers were stained with ink, or maybe blood. Viral had stood, already prepared to argue, as always, but paused when Cassian stopped at the edge of the war table, where the carved map of the 5 kingdoms still glowed faintly with enchantment. Cassian leaned forward, traced a single black-gloved finger along the bloodline carved between the east border and the city of Goldvault. Then he said, in a voice that no longer sounded like his own, "You'll die here." Viral laughed, tight and bitter. "You threatening me now, Chancellor?" Cassian's eyes lifted slowly. Darian froze, because the eyes that looked back weren't violet. They were streaked with something darker, filament like veins of gray gold rippling through black. And they didn't blink. Cassian's lips twitched, not into a smirk, but something crooked and cold. "No," he said. "He is." Then he turned and left the chamber. No one moved for several long seconds, until Darian did. He found the first blood smear outside Cassian's study. Not fresh, but not old either, and not human. It glistened unnaturally, like oil catching candlelight, streaked along the doorframe in the shape of an open palm. Darian touched it. It hissed beneath his fingers, like it recognized his scent and recoiled. He didn't knock. The room was empty, but the window was open. It took Darian an hour to reach the seal chamber beneath Thornhall. Even as king, he needed to bypass 3 enchanted gates, 1 bloodstone bridge, and a memory-locked stairwell that only opened when the right name was whispered in the right tongue. He said, "Cassian." The stone cracked, the door opened, and inside, the scent nearly dropped him to his knees. Burned magic, woven musk, Ashkur's scent. He ran, not walked, ran. And when he reached the core, when he pushed open the obsidian arch into the central seal room, he stopped, because Cassian was there, on his knees, not praying, not pleading, just trembling. Blood soaked the sigils beneath him. They pulsed faintly red, then gold, then black. The Ashkur glyph had been half torn from the ground, as if something had tried to claw its way through from beneath. The center seal was cracked, steam rising from its surface. Cassian's shirt was torn at the back, magic scorched, and on the skin beneath, symbols, not drawn, grown, like black vines inked into muscle, twisting up his spine. Glowing faintly, Darian took 1 step closer. "Cassian." Cassian's shoulders twitched, not like a man responding to his name, like something had heard and recognized him. Cassian turned. The face was still his. The mouth, the hair, the blood, but the eyes were not his own. They gleamed with a sheen of gold and something darker, ancient, possessive, and when he moved it was too fast. Darian cried out as Cassian tackled him, brought him to the floor like a beast, not in cruelty, not in hate, but in overwhelming claim. The impact knocked the breath from him, but the scent that followed, raw, wild, overwhelming, was worse. Cassian's mouth was at his throat. His fingers tangled in Darian's collar. He bit, not to mark, to anchor. Information pulled like wire between them, magic-triggered gland response, a forced lock. Darian shuddered. His whole body responded, reflexive, unwilling, desperate. "Cassian." he gasped. Stop, Cassian growled. Lo, the sound wasn't human. It wasn't even wolven. It was Ishkur's voice in a mortal throat. I knew you liked it rough, he rasped, and for a terrifying second he smiled. Darian's stomach flipped. You're not him, he breathed. Cassian leaned closer. You don't want me to be. Darian threw him off. It wasn't elegant. He used a surge of alpha push, and it broke the contact, sending Cassian skidding across the blood-ridden floor. He slammed into the stone with a thud, and stilled. The light in his eyes flickered, then dimmed. He coughed once. Blood dripped from his mouth, and the sigils on his back faded. Darian stared, heart racing, chest heaving. What the hell? He whispered. Cassian blinked slowly. The real Cassian, exhausted, sweating, eyes not quite focused. You came, he said faintly. Darian crawled toward him, held him up. Of course I came, you idiot. You disappeared for hours. You bit me. Cassian's head lolled. He smiled, a real smile. Did you like it? Darian wanted to shake him. I thought I lost you. I'm not gone. You weren't you. Cassian's fingers brushed Darian's jaw. I never was. Not really. Darian caught his hand, held it tight. Don't say that. Cassian's head tilted back. His breath slowed. I'll lock you down someday, Darian, he murmured. You'll like it when I do. Darian's throat tightened. You're insane. Cassian smiled again, and passed out in his arms. The seal beneath them pulsed, cracked further, and somewhere in the dark, Ishkur whispered through fractured runes. He's mine. Chapter 20, The Fourth Chain. There were no chains in the room, and yet Darian couldn't move. He stood at the threshold of Cassian's private chamber, barefoot, bare-throated, spine still aching from the last time their bodies had clashed against stone, and felt something cold cinch around his lungs. Not the air, not magic, just the way Cassian was looking at him, like he already owned every breath. You came, Cassian said, seated at his writing desk with moonlight streaming behind him, making his black hair glow like a blade just pulled from the scabbard. You asked, Darian replied stiffly. Cassian tilted his head. I didn't ask. That was true. Cassian never asked. He summoned. He expected. He demanded without raising his voice. And Darian had come. Cassian gestured lazily toward the seat across from him. Sit. Darian didn't. Cassian didn't press. He didn't need to. You said it was about the bond, Darian said after a moment, jaw tense. You said it's unstable. It is. So fix it. I intend to. Cassian stood then. His movements were fluid, too quiet for a man of flesh and blood. He crossed the room, stopping in front of Darian, who didn't flinch, but didn't step back, either. Cassian's fingers rose to touch Darian's gland. Not in a caress, in a warning. We'll use the old tongue, he said. The silver binding right. Darian stiffened. That's irreversible. Cassian's violet eyes glittered. Only half of it. You said it would stabilize. It will. What aren't you telling me? Cassian leaned in. That this is the fourth time I've tried to make you kill me. Darian's breath caught. But before he could answer, Cassian had turned. Come, he said, already walking toward the hidden door behind the tapestry. You'll need to kneel for the spell. The Silverthorn ritual hall hadn't been used in years. Not since Darian's coronation. This floor was obsidian. Its pillars were carved with the history of the Wolf Kings. At the center was a stone basin filled with mirrored water, enchanted to reflect not the body, but the soul. Cassian dipped a gloved hand into the basin. He withdrew it glistening, and with 2 fingers, painted a thin rune across Darian's collarbone. The moment it touched skin, Darian's back arched. What? Shoo! Cassian's hand rose again, faster this time. Runes drawn across Darian's chest, his throat, the hollow beneath his ribs, each stroke burning colder than the last. Cassian. The name broke on a gasp as the spell flared. It wasn't pain exactly. It was memory. Darian remembered Cassian touching him before. In the snow. In the gardens. On the battlefield. In bed. But this was different. This was not a touch meant to soothe or stir. It was a brand. Cassian stood before him, chanting low in a tongue older than wolves. Eyes dark, fingers still stained with mirrored light. Velnaria Kesh Idrin. The glyphs ignited. Soren Ash Velkaren. The bond struck. Darian staggered, falling to his knees as the spiritual chain looped once, then twice, around the space between them, not physical, but perceptible in the way breath left his body and entered Cassian's. His own pheromones turned back on him, crashing in waves of hunger and desperation. His hands trembled on the floor. "Stop," he whispered. But even he didn't know what he meant. Cassian watched him fall, then walked forward, kneeled, and placed a single hand on the back of Darian's neck. "You said you wanted me to explain," he murmured. "This is the only language I speak." Darian shook, helpless under the weight of the spell. He couldn't think. He could barely breathe, but his mouth moved anyway. "Don't leave." Cassian's fingers slid under his chin, lifting his face up. "You don't beg like a king." Darian's eyes burned. "Then what am I?" Cassian smiled faintly. "You're mine." The chain sealed with a final echoing crack. Darian's eyes rolled back. He collapsed into Cassian's lap, convulsing once, then going still, sweat and power clinging to his skin like a second cloak. He was still conscious, but barely, and even in that state, his body sought Cassian's. His hands clutched at his sleeve. His face pressed into his thigh like a cub curling into warmth. "Don't go," he whispered again. "Don't go." Cassian didn't answer. He just sat there, hands resting in Darian's hair, eyes distant. After a long silence, he leaned down, kissed Darian's temple, and whispered, "Don't rush to hate me. A king should never fear the chains he forges." Far beneath the Silverthorn Palace, the ancient seal of Eshkur cracked again. The darkness beneath it pulsed like a second heart. Waiting. Chapter 21, His voice in my bones. The fever came like a tide. Darian didn't remember when his body stopped listening to him, just that it had happened sometime after the ritual. One moment he was pressing his cheek to the cool stone floor of the Silverthorn ritual hall. The next he was floating, detached, burning, drowning, and in the middle of that fevered dark, he heard it. A voice, low, clear, singing. Not a song he recognized, but one he had always known. "Sleep, little king, sleep beneath the thorn, where the wolves won't bite, and the cold is warm." Darian turned in the dream. He was small again, barefoot, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket. The nursery windows were fogged with frost. His breath came in shaky clouds. His skin was too hot, and his hands wouldn't stop trembling. He blinked and Cassian was there. Not the man. The boy. 17, dark-haired and sharp-eyed even then. His face lit by the low glow of a rune lamp. He sat at Darian's bedside, elbows on knees, fingers loosely laced like he had nowhere better to be. His mouth moved with the rhythm of the lullaby, soft and precise. "Is this real?" Darian's dream self whispered. Cassian didn't stop singing. The words crawled under Darian's skin. "Sleep, little king. Sleep in the snow, where no one knows what no one should know." Tears pooled at the corners of Darian's eyes. He reached out with one shaking hand. Did you do all of this just to keep me close?" he asked, voice wobbling. "Even back then?" Cassian caught his hand in both of his, and smiled. "You never left, Darian." Darian sobbed. "You lied to me." Cassian touched his forehead to Darian's. "I gave you something truer than truth." The room faded. So did the warmth. But the voice did not. Even when Darian's dream began to dissolve, he could still hear it, echoing, gently, somewhere inside him, as if Cassian's voice had made a home in his bones. The fever broke just before dawn. The real world returned in slivers of candlelight and muffled footfalls. Darian gasped awake, body slick with sweat, head pounding, limbs trembling like a newborn cub's. He tried to sit up, but his arms gave out beneath him. "Stay down," a voice said, too calm for how much it rattled him. Cassian. Of course it was. Darian rolled his head to the side and saw him, crouched beside the bed, sleeves rolled up, fingers wringing out a cloth into a silver bowl. He looked like he hadn't slept. He also looked maddeningly intact. "You," Darian croaked. "You're still here." Cassian didn't glance up. "Your fever was pushing 40. You started seizing at one point. You think I'd leave you alone for that? You're not exactly the nurturing type." Now Cassian looked at him. His violet eyes were flat, but not cold. "You really think this is the first time you've burned up like that?" he asked. "You think the gods handled it all those years?" Darian blinked. "I thought Syl did what she could," Cassian said shortly. "But when it got bad, she called me." He dipped the cloth again, brought it to Darian's forehead, wiped away the sweat with practiced ease. "Every time," he murmured, "you'd cry and ask if you were dying." Darian's breath hitched. "And what did you say?" Cassian's lips twitched. "I said, not yet." Something about the answer, so simple, so sharp, punched straight through the haze of Darian's exhaustion. You stayed with me." Cassian didn't answer. He just reached for Darian's hand and lifted it. Then, slowly, deliberately, he brought Darian's palm to rest flat over his chest, right above his heart. Darian felt the beat, steady, strong, but beneath it something deeper, a whisper of power, a thread of energy, thin and faint and inexorably tied to his own. His blood hummed at the contact. His scent responded instinctively, curling into Cassian's like smoke to fire. He jerked, breath caught. Cassian pressed the hand firmer. "Do you feel it?" he asked softly. "Your mark is already growing roots." Darian couldn't speak, could barely breathe, because it was true. He felt it now, somewhere in the center of his chest, in the marrow of his spine. The spell Cassian had cast was not just lingering. It was nesting. It had curled up like a sleeping beast inside him, and every breath he took fed it. "You put something in me," he whispered. Cassian looked amused. "Only what you allowed." Darian shook his head, dazed. That's not how it works." Cassian leaned in, voice dropping lower. "You think I held your throat and made you beg because of the spell? No, that was all you. You've always wanted to be broken open by me." Darian flushed, not from shame but from heat, because deep down he had, and now he didn't know how to survive it. "Is this permanent?" he asked, barely audible. Cassian stroked a thumb along his knuckles. "The chain will hold as long as you do." Darian closed his eyes. That wasn't an answer. That was a sentence. He stayed there, hand still on Cassian's chest, eyes stinging. "Your voice," he murmured. "It was in my dream." Cassian tilted his head. "What did I say?" Darian looked at him. "You said I never left." Cassian smiled, slow and dark. "And did it feel like a lie?" Darian shook his head. "It felt like you were already under my skin." "I was." "You're still there." Cassian nodded. "That's the point." They sat in silence for a while. Then Darian, still fever-dazed and stripped to nothing but sweat-damp linen, whispered, "If you lose yourself, if Eshkur takes over." Cassian's body stilled. Darian pressed his forehead to Cassian's, echoing the gesture from the dream. "Will I go mad with you?" Cassian didn't hesitate. That would be fair. Darian made a sound, half laugh, half sob. You're so fucking cruel. I'm preparing you. For what? Cassian's hand brushed back a damp strand of hair from his temple. For the part where I don't come back. Darian lunged forward without thinking, wrapped his arms around Cassian, pressed their chests together, held him tight as if touch could banish every shadow. You'll come back, he growled. Cassian exhaled slowly, chin resting on his shoulder. And if I don't? Then I'll follow you into the dark. Cassian chuckled. That sounds like a terrible plan, Your Majesty. Darian bared his teeth. I never said I was a good king. Silence again. Then Cassian pulled back just far enough to kiss his forehead. Not a tease. Not a seduction. Just a mark. You'll be better than me, he said. I don't want to be, Darian replied. Cassian smiled. That's why you will. Outside, the first light of dawn hit the windows. Inside, Darian curled beneath the covers. Cassian stayed seated at his side, unmoving, watching, waiting. The voice that lived in Darian's bones was quiet now. But it hadn't gone. It was simply resting for the next command. Chapter 22, Ash in the Throne Room. The throne room was not made for him. It was too grand, too cold, too lined with ancestral glory that did not belong to his blood. Darian stood beneath the soaring arches of duskstone and charred silver, where light poured through shattered stained glass and scattered like judgment across his shoulders. The wolves in the murals, gold, crimson, ash-white, seemed to bare their teeth at him. But he didn't flinch. Cassian was already seated on the throne. His crown was absent, but that made the image worse, because he looked more comfortable now, almost lazy, draped sideways across the obsidian seat like a serpent that had found the last warm stone in a ruined temple. Why do you look so tense? Cassian's voice was languid. It's your coronation day. Darian's jaw clenched. His ceremonial armor felt like a trap, sheets of bone-white steel molded to his chest and arms, too tight, too heavy. On his shoulders, the sigil of the old royal line burned like a lie. It's not my coronation, Darian replied. It's yours. You planned this. Cassian gave a soft chuckle. Did I? You'll have to be more specific. I planned so many things. Behind Darian, the doors closed with a boom like thunder. The entire citadel seemed to hold its breath. They were alone. He moved forward, each step echoing over the obsidian tiles. As he approached the dais, he saw the finer details, the blood that had dried at the foot of the throne, the dagger marks etched into the armrests from former kings, and the tiny silver bloom crushed beneath Cassian's boot. You slaughtered the council, Darian said. I did, Cassian said. They were going to reject you. Again. I didn't like that. You deserve better. I didn't ask you to kill them. No. But you never ask for anything. That's the problem with you. Cassian rose. Slowly. Gracefully. Like a flame uncoiling from its wick. He stepped down the dais with a glide, his long black coat trailing behind him like shadow made flesh. His eyes, those violet, bleeding star eyes, fixed on Darian with unbearable softness. Do you remember? Cassian murmured, stopping inches away. When you used to sneak into this room as a child? You thought if you sat on the throne just once, they might see you. See you as more than a guard's bastard son. Darian flinched. Cassian smiled faintly. I remember the look on your face when the steward dragged you out by the collar, like something holy had been ripped from your lungs. I wasn't meant for the throne, Darian said quietly. You knew that. Cassian's hand rose, brushing a strand of gold hair from Darian's temple. The touch was achingly tender. And yet here you are, wearing their armor, standing in their hall, speaking like a king. Darian stepped back, heart hammering. Don't do this. Cassian's expression didn't change, but the air thickened. The windows dimmed as if the sun had drawn away in shame. "I offered you the world once," Cassian whispered, "and you chose chains. Now I've broken them. You should be grateful." "Grateful," Darian snapped, fire rising. "You think slaughtering everyone who stood in your way makes me your puppet king?" Cassian's gaze turned molten. "No, I think it makes you mine." He lunged. Darian barely had time to draw his blade before Cassian's hands were on him. One around his throat, the other sliding under his armor, pressing against the bond mark pulsing like wildfire beneath his skin. The mark Cassian had reforged in blood and spirit. The mark that would never fully fade. Darian twisted, slammed Cassian against a pillar. The stone cracked behind them. "I am not yours," he growled. "Not anymore." Cassian smiled through the pain. "Say it again." "I." "Say it louder so I can believe it." Darian shoved him off, breathing hard. The throne loomed behind them. Black, ancient, cursed. "I don't want your crown," he said. "I want you to stop. I want gods, Cassian, I want peace." Cassian's face darkened. "Peace," he spat. That pathetic word. His power erupted. Purple-black mist coiled around him, thick with echoes and old gods, and in its heart stood Cassian, no longer fully man. His eyes gleamed with the fury of the bonded, of the sacrificed, of the damned. "You want peace?" he said, voice splitting like thunder. "Then kill me." Darian froze. The bond between them pulsed again, pain and memory and heat. That day in the riverbed. That night beneath the snowfire tree. That first time Cassian said his name like it meant something. Cassian stepped closer. "You've killed for others. For kingdoms. For duty. Now do it for yourself." Darian's sword trembled in his grip. Cassian pressed his palm to Darian's heart. "Do it," he whispered. "Put an end to this." Their foreheads touched, and Darian broke. Not into anger, not into hate, but into something quieter, something older. His sword dropped with a clang. "I can't," he said. "I still." He couldn't say it. Wouldn't. Cassian pulled back, and for the first time he looked undone. "I see," he said quietly. "Then I'll have to try harder next time." He turned, cloak swishing. "I won't let you destroy everything," Darian said, voice low. Cassian glanced over his shoulder. "That's the difference between us. You're still trying to save the ruins. I just want to burn them." He vanished into shadow, leaving Darian alone. The throne room echoed with silence. An ash. Chapter 23, Burn the Loyal. The flames painted the northern courtyard in gold and blood. They were not the clean burning pyres of a soldier's burial, nor the quiet embers left by a hearth in mourning. These flames howled. They clawed at the sky. They feasted on flesh and stone. And beneath them, 3 noble banners curled and cracked like the bones of gods too slow to kneel. Cassian stood before the fire with his arms folded behind him, his silhouette razor sharp against the glow. His coat was unfastened, windswept open like a cloak of shadow. Around him, the smell of char and roasted silk clung to the wind, thick as incense in a heretic's cathedral. "The House of Halwyn," he said, voice calm, "burns for conspiracy." A scream tore from the blaze, too hoarse to be human, too late to be silenced. He turned his head slightly. "So does the House of Quereth." Helrith, the imperial envoy, did not look away from the flames. "You don't fear provoking the council?" Cassian gave a slow blink, lashes silvered by firelight. "Let them come. I'll burn them too." From the shadows of the far colonnade, General Lorcan shifted uneasily. "This will spread. Their sons command troops at the east border." Cassian's smile was soft. "Then it will spread east." Ash fluttered around them like snow, but Darian was not watching from the walls. He was already storming through the palace, cape undone, steps unsteady with rage. Guards moved from his path like startled deer, knowing that look in their king's eyes, wild, golden, dangerously wet. He reached Cassian's chambers without ceremony, shoved the doors open with both hands. "You bastard," he snarled. Cassian didn't look surprised. He sat at his writing desk, quill in hand, as if nothing had happened. "They had children," Darian shouted. One of them, Faye Quereth, was 17. A girl. She was supposed to be wed this moon. Cassian dipped his quill. "Then she died clean." Darian grabbed the ink bottle and hurled it against the wall. The sound shattered like bone. Cassian didn't flinch. "You sit there and call it strategy," Darian hissed. "But you're not even trying to hide it anymore." Cassian looked up then. His violet eyes were cold glass. "Hide what?" "That you're becoming exactly what they always said you were." Cassian rose slowly, the motion fluid as silk. "And you," he said, stepping forward, "are still pretending you didn't know." Darian's fists trembled. "You want me to rule?" Cassian's voice was quiet now, intimate. "Then I need a kingdom, not a debate chamber. You're building it on ashes. It'll hold better that way." Darian moved before he thought. One stride, then another, and his hand caught Cassian's collar. He yanked him forward and crashed their mouths together. Not in a kiss, not really. In a battle of breath and fury, teeth clashing and desperation breaking through every line of restraint. Cassian let him, for a moment. Then his hands rose, one gripping Darian's jaw, the other pressing firm against his chest, reversing their positions in a heartbeat. "You think this makes me soft?" he whispered against Darian's mouth. "You think you can control me like this?" Darian's breath hitched. He hated that he shivered. Cassian pressed in, knee between his legs, words spilling like poison-laced honey. "You want to tame me, little king. But wolves don't wear chains. They chew through them." Darian's body arched, caught between resistance and desire, rage and need. His hands curled in Cassian's coat, pulling, pushing, failing. Cassian leaned in, licking a streak of ink from his cheek. "You taste like hypocrisy." "Shut up," Darian gasped. Cassian did, for a while. And then he reminded the king why his mouth had always been more dangerous when closed. Later, when the fire outside had burned to embers and the palace had quieted into watchful sleep, Darian lay on the chaise, barely covered by the discarded fur throw. His eyes were red, his voice hoarse from yelling and other things. His hands trembled not from cold, but from exhaustion. Cassian returned from the washroom with a basin of clean water. He dipped the cloth, wrung it with precision, and crouched beside Darian. "You don't get to take care of me after doing that," Darian said quietly. Cassian ignored him, gently wiping the sweat from his brow. Darian closed his eyes. "I hate you," he whispered. Cassian said nothing, just combed the damp strands from his forehead and kissed the spot above his temple. "You keep breaking things," Darian murmured. "That's the only way to see what they're made of." Darian caught his wrist suddenly, fingers tight. "Don't leave," Cassian stilled. "You always leave," Darian whispered. "You tear it all down and then vanish before I can breathe." Cassian sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at him. His fingers curled behind Darian's neck, tilting his face up. "You're not ready to hold what I am," he said. "But I'm giving it to you anyway." Darian's throat worked. "Why?" Cassian's smile was almost soft. "Because I want to know what happens when you drop it." He tucked the blanket tighter around Darian's shoulders, then rose. Darian sat up, struggling with the sudden loss of warmth. "Where are you going?" Cassian turned at the door. "To finish what I started." He disappeared into the dark. Later that night, Cassian stood alone before the remains of the pyres. His coat was still open, the wind playing at its hem. The last flames licked at the base of a shattered house crest, now melted beyond recognition. He watched them burn with no joy, no triumph. Only a quiet, terrible finality. "You should have killed me tonight," he murmured, voice nearly swallowed by the wind. A wolf howled in the distance. Cassian smiled without humor. "That was your last chance." Chapter 24, The Thorned Crown Splits. They were already arguing when the imperial envoys arrived. Darian stood at the far end of the ceremonial hall, spine taut with fury, his cloak half draped from his shoulder, eyes locked not on the delegation in silver and crimson, but on the man beside the throne dais. Cassian hadn't bowed to the Empire, hadn't moved at all. The entire court buzzed with the sound of held breath. At the center of it all, Darian's voice rose, sharp as the edge of the crown he wore. "Why didn't I see the dispatch from the southern border?" Cassian didn't blink. "Because it wasn't yours to read yet." Silence fell like a blade. The imperial ambassador looked between them with a flicker of interest, something serpentine curling at the edges of his mouth. The nobles shifted nervously, as if realizing they were no longer watching a king and his advisor, but a king and his cage. "I am the king," Darian said, taking a step forward. "You don't get to decide what I read." Cassian tilted his head, smiling faintly. "Don't I?" The hall felt smaller with each word. Issel, the imperial watchdog, stepped forward from the envoy line and held up a damp sheet of parchment. "This," he said, "was intercepted from Lord Marevik's courier. A casualty report from the Southern Watch, sealed for over 3 days." The room erupted. Gasps, protests, and Darian's hand, lifting sharply, silencing them all. His jaw trembled. "You lied to me." Cassian turned, slowly, and met his gaze. "I delayed. There's a difference." Darian's fists clenched. "You want to manipulate the court, fine. But you don't get to manipulate me." Cassian stepped closer, just one step, but it was enough to make the nobility retreat without thinking. "If I truly wanted to manipulate you," he said softly, "do you think you'd still be standing?" It was a threat. No, worse. It was a reminder. Darian felt it like a lash across his spine. He turned on his heel and left the court without another word. He didn't speak for hours. Not to the guards. Not to Syl, who brought tea he didn't drink. Not to the wind that moaned past the balconies of his chamber, where he sat long into twilight with the crown beside him on the table, untouched. He stared at the coals in the hearth until they blurred into ash and light, until the memories started leaking from his eyes, hot and silent. He didn't even realize he was crying until he was already moving, fast, blind, down the eastern corridor, barefoot. The guards outside Cassian's chamber didn't stop him. They never did. He slammed the door shut behind him, and the instant the latch caught, he collapsed against the man inside. "Don't!" he gasped. "Don't send me away again." Cassian stiffened at first, caught mid-motion with a book still in his hand. But Darian didn't let go. He wrapped his arms around Cassian's waist and buried his face in the crook of his neck like he had when he was a child, sobbing silently. "I can't," Darian whispered. "I can't do it without you." Cassian didn't sigh, didn't curse. He just stood there for a moment, then gently set the book down and pressed a palm to the back of Darian's head. "Every time you cry," he murmured, "I start to wonder if I've gone too soft." Darian laughed, wet and bitter. "Then stop pushing me so far." Cassian pulled him close until they sank together onto the edge of the bed. "You asked me not to protect you like a child, so I stopped. But I didn't ask you to lie to me." Cassian said nothing. Darian looked up at him through tear-soaked lashes. "I'm not strong without you." Cassian's lips twitched. "That's the point. You were never supposed to be." He reached down and touched the thin chain around his neck. From beneath his shirt, he drew a sheathed dagger no longer than a forearm. Its hilt was carved with the old crest of the Rask bloodline, twining thorns encircling a wolf's eye. Cassian placed it in Darian's lap. "You want to rule alone?" he said. "Then start here. Kill me." Darian stared at the blade like it had grown fangs. "You think I haven't wanted to? I'm counting on it." Darian's hands shook as he lifted the weapon, then faltered. "Why this?" Cassian met his eyes. "Because if you want to be king, you have to prove it's yours." Darian laughed again, this time not bitter. "You're insane." Cassian leaned in, voice a whisper against his mouth. "And you're still kissing me." And he was desperate, grasping, like drowning in salt. Cassian let him. Then, with no warning, flipped him onto the sheets, pinning him by the wrists. "Do it," he said, breath warm against his skin. "Put it in my chest. Mark your throne." Darian growled through clenched teeth. "You think this turns me on?" Cassian smirked. "I think you don't know where I end and you begin anymore." The dagger fell from Darian's hand, landing with a muffled thud on the carpet. Cassian bent down, kissed his throat, his collarbone, then paused, lips ghosting over the throb of Darian's pulse. "You keep saying you hate me," he whispered, "but you've never stopped choosing me." Darian reached up, tore the fastenings from his shirt. "I hate how much I need you." Cassian didn't smile this time. "I know." They didn't speak again for a long time. When it was over, Darian lay half-curled in the center of the bed, hair damp with sweat, skin flushed, eyes distant. Cassian sat beside him, running fingers along his ribs. "You should hate me," Cassian murmured. Darian didn't look at him. "I do," he whispered. Cassian leaned close and kissed the back of his neck. "You're not done yet." Darian rolled over. "What?" Cassian rose, moved to the firelight. He picked up the dagger again and turned it in his hand. "You still haven't killed me." Darian's mouth went dry. "I told you," Cassian said softly. "If you want their loyalty, if you want them to kneel, you'll have to bury me to do it." And just like that, the thorned crown split again. Not in gold, not in blood, but in the silence between two men who had never stopped needing each other to break. Chapter 25. The core he swallowed. The descent was silent, like falling into his own grave. Cassian stepped barefoot onto the final stair of the Belever core chamber, a realm carved beneath the oldest foundation of the Silverthorn Palace. The walls pulsed faintly with blood-red light, matching the rhythm of a heart that should never have beat. His cloak trailed behind him, soaked in the dampness of ancient stone, until he let it fall. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with the tension of what he was about to become. The core floated before him, suspended, throbbing like a living heart encased in obsidian and silver, runes screaming against the air in forgotten tongues. Generations of kings had sealed it away. But the seal only waited for one mad enough to unmake it. Cassian raised his arms. The markings along his forearms shimmered to life, reacting to the old blood magic etched into his veins long before he became a prince's shadow. Spiraer Nox, Exipir Flamma, Damari Regis. The words did not echo. They buried themselves in the stone. The core surged. Light ruptured the ground. And then it pierced him. It hit like fire kissing the lungs. He choked. Every breath flayed raw by power, searing through his ribcage like hot blades. The core sank into him, melting through his chest, crawling under skin. Black lines burst forth across his shoulders, winding down his spine. His knees gave out. Still, he didn't scream. He pressed his forehead to the floor, letting the agony crash over him like tides. The chamber reeked of blood, of burning ozone, of old magic unshackled. His mouth twisted into a smile, sharp, bitter. "You won't have a choice now, little wolf," he whispered into the stone. By the time he surfaced from the underground vault, he was half light, half shadow. His right eye had turned fully black, the iris a molten gold slit. The Ishkur's script moved on his skin like crawling vines. He didn't wear armor, only the black robe, loose and open at the front, revealing the runes etched along his bare torso like scars. He looked like a specter risen from ruin. He walked the capital's high street at dusk. No guards stopped him, until the screams began. A flare of magic pulsed from his chest, barely a breath of his new power. And yet, it vaporized an entire courtyard of stone. The air rippled. Bells tolled. A child cried. Within moments, the imperial envoy Helrith and 3 high-ranking nobles stormed into the square. The sigils of peace were torn from their sleeves, replaced with drawn swords and desperate commands. "Cassian Maravik," one of them shouted, voice sharp as a blade. "Stand down and surrender the core." Cassian tilted his head. The golden veins across his arms glowed. He whispered a word. Fire devoured them. Not just fire. Magic made flame, made rot, made hunger. The first to burn had time to scream. The others did not. By the time the guards rushed in, there was only ash. The scent of scorched blood filled the sky. He stood at the center of it, the sole pillar amid ruin, black robes fluttering in the burning wind. And then he turned. Darian arrived breathless, cloak torn from the mad gallop through the city, guards in disarray behind him. He pushed past the line of scorched soldiers, eyes wide. He stopped. Cassian's back was to him, charred stone around his feet. 3 human-shaped shadows seared into the ground. "Cassian!" Darian's voice cracked like ice. Cassian turned. His face was pale, bloodless. The marks on his body shimmered with unnatural light. His smile was slow, hollow. The man who once cradled a feverish boy to sleep was no longer standing there. Only the thing he'd become. "I was tired of waiting," Cassian said quietly. "So I decided to move the blade myself." Darian took a step forward. His boots scraped through ash. "You killed them. They wanted me dead. I simply beat them to the moment." "You brought war to the capital," Darian hissed. "This was our home." Cassian's eyes softened, so gently, so tragically it felt like a mockery. "You were never going to strike unless I left you no other option. So now," he spread his arms. "Come on, my king. Raise your blade." Darian's hands clenched at his sides. The scent of burned hair, flesh, and old magic coiled around his throat. "I begged you to live," Darian whispered. "You said you'd stay." Cassian stepped forward, flames curling behind him. "And I did. Long enough to become something you'd have no choice but to destroy. You used me. I saved you." Cassian's voice dropped. "I kept them from poisoning your throne. I bled in your stead. I buried sins so deep your crown never touched dirt. You think I did that for them? Then why?" Darian's voice cracked again, this time not from rage, but grief. "Why throw it all away?" Cassian exhaled. The magic flickered. "Because I was always meant to be your blade," he said. "Not your lover, not your shield, just the thing you'd need to kill." He stepped closer. The flames parted for him, revealing the full ruin. "You won't do it behind closed doors," Cassian murmured. "So here I am. Burnt offerings, blood on my hands, no mercy left." He stopped only inches away. "Come, my king," he whispered, voice like a prayer gone wrong. "Finish it." Darian looked at him, looked at the man who used to kiss the crown of his head when he trembled, at the shadow that became his moonlight, at the monster that now bore his name like a chain. "I hate you," he whispered. Cassian's lips curled. "You should." But Darian didn't draw his sword. He fell to his knees, hands trembling, throat tight, eyes brimming. "You're all I have left," he said. "Don't make me do this." Cassian knelt with him, touched his cheek. "You were never alone," he said. "You just never learned how to let go." Then, almost gently, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead to Darian's. "Burn me," he whispered, "and they'll never question your rule again." A moment passed, long and fragile. Then Cassian rose, turned, and walked into the fire. Chapter 26 The Beast in His Name. Smoke had a voice. It whispered as it rose from the burning corpses in the king's square, curling around stone columns, slithering into broken windows and crying mouths. It said the name of the man who once commanded the kingdom's pulse, now nothing more than a shadow of black fire. "Cassian," someone whispered, perhaps a soldier or a priest or a boy who used to believe in kings. The name caught in the ash-choked air and turned to cinder before reaching the heavens. Cassian was no longer Cassian. What prowled the moonlit streets of Thornhall was a beast shaped from ruin. Obsidian-scaled wings arched from his back like razors, burning with ethereal fire that did not flicker but howled. His spine arched like a bow pulled too far, tendons glowing with Eshker script, and his hands, once the hands that wiped blood from Darian's fevered brow, were claws that tore through man and stone alike. But he didn't touch Darian. He never touched him. Every time the king turned down an alley, there he was, standing in the wreckage, watching him. "Darian!" The voice rasped, low, guttural, laced with soot and longing. "Darian!" Darian had stopped counting how many had died. He'd stopped thinking of names, of allegiances, of royal decrees. His hand still clutched the ceremonial blade Cassian had once given him, the one meant to kill him. Now it trembled. Now it stayed sheathed. Guards rushed past him, howling warnings. "The demon is in the east quarter. No, he's circling back. Protect the palace. Protect the king." But none of them understood. None of them knew what Darian saw. Beneath the blaze of that unholy form, beneath the glint of scales and the red-black mist that poured from his lips, he saw a man, still curled in that hollow chest, still calling his name like a prayer. Darian! He couldn't kill that voice. He wouldn't. He cornered him at last at the edge of the ruined old hall, where the statues of dead kings had been cracked by Cassian's magic hours before. Blood soaked the cobblestones. Soldiers screamed for permission to strike, arrows readied, but Darian raised his hand. No. The beast growled once, low, a thunder deep within his chest, but he did not pounce. Darian took one step forward, then another, then drew his own blade, but not to raise it. He sliced his palm open in one quick, clean stroke. Warm blood dripped from his fingers to the broken stones, pooling at the beast's clawed feet. He let it fall, let it stain the sacred ground where wolf kings had once been crowned. "If you're still in there," he said, voice raw, cracking, "then don't kill me, just me. Everyone else, leave them. But not me. You said I was your king, didn't you? Then obey me, just this once." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was breath, a hitch in the ribs of something inhuman. The wings stilled, the air thickened. Cassian's claws scraped the ground once, as if resisting the command of muscles too tightly wound in magic. His chest heaved, then again, until slowly, tortuously, he fell to his knees. The fire didn't stop burning, but it no longer spread. He knelt in Darian's blood and trembled. And when Darian took one more step and placed his hand gently against that ruined, fever-hot cheek, the beast leaned in, not to bite, to be held. Cassian collapsed in his arms. No words, only breath. No spells, only the dry rasp of someone caught between man and monster, trembling like a boy in a storm. His body was hotter than anything Darian had ever touched, molten with magic, searing through fabric, but still, the king held him. Arrows glinted in the distance. "Stand down," Darian barked. "But your majesty, stand down." The silence that followed was absolute. He sank to his knees, cradling Cassian's half-transformed form, whispering the words he couldn't say when others were near. I hate you. I hate what you've done. But I'll be damned before I let them touch you. Cassian stirred. A flicker of lucidity passed behind his corrupted irises, gold threaded through obsidian. His lips parted, cracked and bloodless, and a dry breath pushed from between them. Don't, he rasped. Don't hold me. You're mine to hold, Darian whispered back. Cassian's fingers gripped the king's tunic weakly. You should have killed me. Maybe I still will, Darian said, brushing a soot-drenched strand of hair from his brow. No, Cassian's voice was hoarse. You never do. And then, like a storm that recedes for breath, the body in his arms slackened. Not in death. Not yet. Just enough to rest his head against Darian's shoulder, broken wings curling in like shields. Darian pressed a kiss to his temple, closing his eyes. You can't die, he whispered, because I haven't forgiven you yet. Night fell, and with it a new voice stirred. From deep beneath Thornhall, where Eshker's seal had cracked and the Belever core still throbbed with black light, a voice hissed in every corner of Darian's mind. If you won't kill him, it said, then you will become him. The king looked down. Cassian stirred in his arms. His eyes blinked open, and they were no longer just gold and black. They burned now, deep red at the edges, rimmed in frost. Don't come closer, he croaked. Next time, I'll bite. Chapter 27 The Blood of What He Loved. The streets had fallen silent in the wake of fire. Not the silence of sleep, nor surrender. It was the quiet that came after a scream, the echo of something too final to name. Blood soaked the flagstones of Thornhall's Blood Street, still hot. The scent curled up from cracked stone like incense in a forgotten shrine. Cassian stood in it, barefoot, bare-chested, his wings tucked behind his shoulders like the folded hands of a penitent. Except there was no penance here, only ruin. He didn't look at the corpse at first, only at his hands, bloodied, trembling, then at the claw that had done it, still dripped red. Syl, he whispered. No answer. Of course not. She had stepped in front of the crowd, small, fragile, still holding the royal crest in both hands as if it might shield her. He hadn't recognized her until her voice broke through the madness. Don't, she'd cried. Please, he still loves you. Then he struck. The memory played back again, until the red in his vision stopped being rage and turned into something colder, something like grief. He finally looked down. Her body was curled slightly, one hand still outstretched as if reaching toward something behind him, toward the children she'd pushed out of the way, or maybe toward the man she had once trusted to protect them. Cassian sank to his knees beside her. The blood smeared across his chest wasn't hers alone anymore. He stared at the dark pool beneath her and murmured, barely audible, "Now there's no way back." Behind him, footsteps. He didn't turn. The footsteps stopped. Cassian exhaled. "I thought you'd come." He turned slowly. Darian stood at the edge of the bloodied street, silver hair clinging to his sweat-drenched brow, sword still sheathed, for now. His cloak fluttered in the ash-drenched wind. His eyes were calm, too calm. Cassian tilted his head. "Aren't you going to ask me why?" Darian said nothing. Cassian smiled faintly. "That's right. You don't need to anymore." The sword came free. A single motion. No hesitation. A whisper of steel. Cassian rose to his feet. Slowly. Blood slicked down his arms and thighs, streaking through the black lines of Eshker runes that pulsed like veins. He spread his hands. "This is it," he said softly. "The 5th time. The last time." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I knew you couldn't do it while she was alive." The wind picked up, a storm whispering through broken windows. "You always needed one reason not to kill me, so I took it away." Darian's jaw clenched. Behind him, soldiers began to approach, slowly, carefully, as if trying not to disturb a beast that hadn't yet noticed them. But they all stopped the moment Cassian shifted. Not forward, but toward the sky. He looked up. Ash-black clouds writhed like veins above Thornhall. From the far edges of the city, a low vibration began to hum beneath the stones. Cassian's lips moved. A whisper. Ishkar. The name alone opened something. A pulse shook the earth. Somewhere below, in the catacombs beneath the throne, Belever's core, what remained of it, cracked open fully. Magic long sealed was now untethered. The gates had opened, and the monster was already outside them. Cassian lowered his gaze. Darian's blade glinted. "You don't even have to be angry," Cassian murmured. "Just aim true." Still, Darian did not move. Cassian tilted his head. "What's wrong? You promised you'd kill me if I ever crossed the line." His smile faltered. "You promised." Then, quietly, almost like a prayer, "Please." Darian stepped forward. The silence stretched. He stopped 3 paces away. Cassian met his eyes. Everything else fell away. The fire, the ash, the screams. Just them. "Say it," Cassian whispered. "Say it." Darian's lips parted. One word. "Fine." Wordlessly, Cassian closed his eyes. He turned his back, wings lowering. As if waiting, as if offering. The blade rose behind him. But it did not fall, not yet. Darian's grip trembled. His eyes burned, not from smoke. From the last shred of mercy bleeding out of his soul. Cassian did not speak again. He simply stood in the blood of what Darian loved. And waited. As he always had. Chapter 28, The Lake They Promised to Return to. The road out of Thornhall was choked with smoke and the cries of those who could not escape the fires. Darian did not look back. His cloak was torn, his hands bloodied, but he held fast to the figure slumped against him as if he carried the last ember of the world. Cassian's body was heavy, too heavy. The wings dragging ash in the dirt behind them, claws twitching in half-unconscious spasms. His head lolled against Darian's shoulder, breath shallow and uneven, words spilling sometimes like broken glass. "Darian," he murmured. A whisper, a rasp, not quite human anymore. "Don't look." "I'm not," Darian hissed, his throat tight as iron. "I'm not leaving you here." Every guard that dared draw near he pushed back with the command of his scent, the steel of his eyes. No one touched them. No one would. The king walked through ruin with his monster cradled like a bride, and no one dared say the word traitor aloud. By the time the blackened woods thinned and the old road bent toward the lake, night had descended. The moon lifted herself out of water as if she too had been waiting. Moon Lake lay still, its surface unbroken, glassy as memory. And at its center, just visible through reeds and mist, the cabin still stood. Weathered beams, half-collapsed roof, but standing. The cabin where they had once been boys. Darian dragged Cassian inside. The floor smelled of damp moss and rotting wood. Dust layered the old cot, but he laid Cassian upon it as if it were silk. The creature stirred, eyes flicking open. Not gold, not black, but both, molten in their dissonance. He looked at Darian but through him, past him, into something else only he could see. "Don't!" Cassian's jaw clenched, words grinding from his throat. "Don't bring me back here." Darian sat at the edge of the cot, his voice steadier than his heart. "You said once we'd come back. That if we lived, we'd return here." Cassian's lips curled. Not a smile. The shape of one. "I also said, I'd die in your hands." Darian's throat closed. His fingers trembled as he pulled something from his cloak. A tattered map. Ink blurred from years, edges worn. "Do you remember this?" he whispered. "You drew it. A boy's hand, too sure of itself. You showed me the path into the woods, the way to the lake. You said if we followed it, we'd escape the assassins. Cassian's eyes flickered. A hand twitched, claws retracting for a heartbeat. He looked down at the paper as if it were a ghost. His breath stuttered. But then, with a sharp growl, he bit his own wrist until black blood welled. No! Darian seized his arm, pressed his lips to the torn skin, trying to stop the self-ruin. Don't hurt yourself. Not here. Not in the one place we swore was ours. Cassian shook, chest heaving, but did not pull away. For a heartbeat, his eyes softened, as if he saw something past the haze. Then his head rolled back, and he sank into silence. That night Darian dreamt. Moon Lake stretched before him, silver-lit, still as glass. A boat drifted upon it, and in it, Cassian as he once was, young, sharp-eyed, hair black and long but untainted by ash. He leaned on the oar, watching the moon's reflection ripple across the water. "Come," the boy said. Darian stepped into the boat. Cassian's arm went around his shoulder. It was warm, gentle, a kind of intimacy he could never find again. "Someday," Cassian whispered, his mouth close to Darian's ear, "when the crown isn't hunting us anymore, we'll live here, just you and me. The water, the trees, no blood, no throne." Darian's throat ached. He whispered into the dream, "If you're still with me, I'd leave the throne. I'd leave it all." Cassian smiled, a boy's smile, brighter than any fire. "Then promise me." "I promise." The dream shattered. He woke to shivering. Cassian sat by the lake outside the cabin, his body hunched, wings folded tight against him. He was staring at the water as if it accused him. Darian stumbled to him, cloak dragging. He knelt, took Cassian's cold hand in his own. "You're freezing." He pressed Cassian's palm to his lips. "Why are you out here?" Cassian's voice was broken glass. "Because I don't belong inside anymore. Not where the living sleep." Darian kissed the scarred hand again. "If you die, I will not be king. Do you understand? You drag me into the fire, but you don't get to walk away alone." Cassian's head turned slowly. His eyes met his, burning, blurred. "Stop lying. You were born to be king. I was born to be yours." Darian's voice shook. "That's all." For a moment, silence. Then Cassian leaned against him, forehead pressed to his shoulder, body trembling like a wolf cub in winter. He whispered, "If you don't kill me, Eshker will come. He'll take what's left." Darian kissed his temple, eyes shut against the weight of the night. "Then I'll kill Eshker first." The moon swelled higher. Across the lake, ripples spread, though no wind stirred. Somewhere in the distance, a voice laughed, not Cassian's, not human. The promise of the dream echoed still between them, fragile and sharp as glass. "You said we'd live here. You said you'd stay." Darian held him tighter, and Cassian whispered again, almost tender, almost afraid, Don't come closer. Next time I might bite." But he did not pull away, and Darian did not let go. Chapter 29, The Ash That Spoke. The world of fire was silent. Cassian floated in it, though his body still burned. The stone beneath his bare feet was not stone at all but memory calcified into black glass, cracked in places where light leaked upward like veins of molten silver. He knew this place. He had walked these halls as a man. He now stood in them as something else. The throne loomed ahead, vast and skeletal, forged of the same thorns that once crowned kings. But on it sat no king, only shadow. Eshker's voice came not from the figure but from the walls, from the cracks in the stone, from the bones of the air. "You wanted a king," the voice purred. "You wanted him sharpened, harder, crueler. You wanted the boy with the silver hair to grow fangs. And yet you still cradle him as if he were the wolf pup you picked up in the snow." Cassian did not answer. His chest rose and fell raggedly. His arms, once strong enough to wield 100 blades, shook as the black marks seared deeper into his skin. Eshker's laughter scratched the air. You thought you could choose when to be monster, when to be man. But the crown needs more than a regent who whispers and bites at the king's ear. It needs blood. Yours. And the hall shifted. Cassian saw himself dragged forward, his body chained, his knees crushed to the stone. Nobles jeered, priests spat, and above them all Darian sat on the throne, silver hair spilling over his shoulders, a crown carved of Cassian's own bones set upon his brow. The boy he had raised, the king he had made, expressionless, watching, Cassian's mouth filled with iron. He tasted his own blood, his own tongue severed, his own hands hacked away. 1,000 cuts opened, and Darian did not move. Eshker's shadow bent close, its words worming into his ear. This is what you wanted. He rules because you broke. He is strong because you are ash. Tell me, serpent, will you feed me, or will you become me? Cassian clenched his jaw until it cracked. You can't tempt me with my own ruin. Can't I? Eshker lifted his head by invisible strings, forced his gaze up. The vision sharpened. Darian's hands upon the throne's arms, steady, unshaking. The council silent before him. No Cassian beside him. No chain binding him. A king, entire and unbroken. Cassian's heart convulsed. His lips curled into something that wasn't a smile but hurt the same. I don't care, he whispered. If I have to be monster, I'll be monster. If he has to stand on my bones to rule, then so be it. I said he would be king. And I don't lie. Eshker's voice trembled with hunger. Then take me. Swallow me whole. Let my marrow lace your blood. You'll never be man again. You'll never hear him call your name with love again. But his kingdom, his kingdom will endure forever. Cassian's throat bobbed once. He did not flinch when the claws of the shadow slid into his chest. He did not cry when black fire poured into his veins. He only whispered through clenched teeth. Just let him live. Let him live and be cruel enough to survive. The rest of me doesn't matter. And the world shattered. Reality was less kind. Cassian's body convulsed on the cabin floor, blood gushing from his mouth, from the corners of his eyes, from the etched runes that blistered his arms. His wings spasmed, shredding the walls. The air stank of burning marrow. Darian fell to his knees beside him, catching his head before it cracked against the boards. Cassian! His voice ripped raw. Stop it. Do you hear me? Stop. Don't disappear. Don't leave me again. Cassian's back arched, every muscle tearing. His lips peeled from his teeth. His claws raked the floor until sparks flew. Darian clutched his face, pressing their foreheads together. If you want to kill, then kill me. Kill me, but don't you dare run from me. Don't you dare vanish into that void. The only answer was blood. The only sound was a choking gasp. Cassian's eyes fluttered open once, briefly, glazed, half drowned in gold and black. He looked at Darian as if he were already a memory. And in the collapsing cavern of his mind, Eshker leaned close and whispered, Tell him before you're gone. Cassian's lips moved. The words came out shredded, broken, but Darian heard them. Tell him, I did not love him. Then his eyes rolled back, and fire consumed his veins. When they opened again, his pupils were no longer Cassian's. They were gold-rimmed with black, burning, bleeding into each other until they became something entirely new, something Eshker had chosen, and Darian's arms were the only thing holding him to the earth. Chapter 30 The God-Eater. The Silverthorn Avenue was burning. Stone cracked under claws that no longer looked like they belonged to any man, wings spreading wide enough to blot out the sky. Cassian's body had become a cathedral of ruin. Veins laced with molten black, eyes split between gold and ash, hair unbound and haloed with fire. Every step shook the ground, and yet when he opened his mouth, his first words carried low and steady, almost gentle. "Keep him away. Don't let Darian near." The command carried on the air like a storm. Soldiers who had braced themselves for slaughter paused, their knees nearly buckling under the pressure of a presence they could not comprehend. Then he moved. The first strike was not against them but against the black banners of the Empire still hanging from shattered arches. His hand tore them down, flame bursting from the contact, and the men who had come to enslave the capital screamed as Cassian ripped through them like parchment. He burned priests of Ashkur where they stood, their chants dying in their throats as he devoured their voices in fire. Each death was a mercy he did not name. Each strike cut away something in himself. The soldiers of Thornhall began to shout, at first in fear, then in awe. "Savior, God, Deliverer." But Darian, watching from the barricades, could not lift his voice. He saw the truth. Cassian was not saving them. He was spending himself like coin, burning the last tattered cloth of humanity until nothing would remain but ash. Darian pushed through the crowd, his cloak torn, blade drawn. He ignored the cries of his advisors, ignored Viral's desperate plea, "Majesty, don't." He forced his way forward until the fire parted, until Cassian turned his head. Those eyes, black threaded through gold. They found him instantly, as if the chaos of the world bent toward that gaze. Cassian's chest rose, ragged, his voice a rumble that shook the stones. "You came." "I always come," Darian rasped, tears streaking his dirt-stained face. "Even when you dragged me into hell." Cassian's expression shifted, an echo of a smile, too broken to be whole. His wings folded inward, fire dimming just enough that Darian could step closer. Around them, the air reeked of charred flesh and iron. "Tell me," Cassian whispered, the shadow of Ashkur moving beneath his tongue. "Do you want a god, or do you want me?" The question carved Darian open. He dropped his blade point into the earth between them, his shoulders shaking. "I don't care about thrones, about crowns, about gods. I only ever wanted you." For a moment the fire flickered low. The monstrous veins receded, leaving only Cassian's face, pale and trembling, eyes searching as if the words themselves were a bomb. His clawed hand rose, slow, hesitant, brushing the tear that ran down Darian's cheek. "You cry too much for a king," Cassian murmured, voice rough. "And you bleed too much for a man who says he doesn't care." Darian caught the wrist, pressing it to his lips, ignoring the taste of iron. His scent poured out uncontrolled, desperate, binding. "Stop burning yourself out just to save me. Stop making me the excuse for your ruin." Cassian's breath caught. Then he leaned in, his forehead resting against Darian's, the fire at his back roaring higher as if the contact demanded more fuel. His words were low, almost broken. "Tomorrow," he said, "you wear the crown. Tomorrow you become what I made you." "And you?" Darian's voice cracked. Cassian's lips curved, bitter, resigned. "Tomorrow I fall beneath your sword." Darian's entire body shook with denial, but the monster's eyes were steady, unblinking. The fire swelled, soldiers shouting from the edges of the street. Cassian drew back just enough to look at him one last time, his voice quiet enough only Darian could hear. "It's always been you, even now when I'm nothing but ash." The flames roared, drowning the city in red. That night, in the silent council hall, Darian sat alone upon the throne. His hair was unbound, silver spilling around his shoulders. His eyes stared at the chamber doors as if waiting for them to open, though he knew they would not. Beside him on the arm of the throne lay a sword, honed and gleaming, and upon the table before him sat a single black iron ring of thorns. He reached out, touched it once with trembling fingers, and whispered into the emptiness, Then let it be tomorrow. Chapter 31 The Crown Cracks. The battlefield was no longer earth but a wound. Smoke lay low across the plain, thick as wool, tasting of iron and ruin. The banners of the north were snapped in half, men screaming beneath the weight of shadows that were not entirely flesh. From the east, the Eshkur legions poured forth, their mouths open in unison, chanting hunger into the marrow of the air. Darian stood at the ridge, sword trembling in his grasp, watching the storm at its center. Cassian. His body was no longer his own. The black sigils carved into his flesh now pulsed with a life that had nothing to do with him. His wings tore through the sky, dripping fire. From his shoulders burst thorns, jagged and cruel, growing faster than they could be contained. He had thrown himself into the maw of the final beast Eshkur unleashed, a creature of molten sinew and screaming void, and fused with it, sealing its rampage inside his own burning frame. For a heartbeat it looked like salvation. Cassian's claws tore through the monster's ribs, his fire consuming the beast's heart. The Eshkur army faltered. The men of the north shouted his name. But Darian's chest hollowed with dread, because Cassian did not stop. He turned, half god, half devil, eyes blazed scarlet gold, and cut through soldiers indiscriminately. Friend and foe, all bled beneath his claws. His mouth opened in a sound not wholly his own, and the ground itself writhed with black roots. Cassian! Darian's voice cracked as he charged forward. Cassian, stop! The monster stilled. For an instant, his head turned. The ruin of him was unbearable. Hair a river of black flame, eyes bloodshot, body splitting apart beneath the weight of the thorn crown magic. Yet in that ruin something flickered. His voice, torn from a throat that barely remembered words, reached Darian. Kill me! Darian froze, his hand clutching the sword hilt so tightly his knuckles split. Cassian staggered toward him, blood steaming off his chest, thorns curling around his ribs. The battlefield shook as his presence alone ripped through air and earth. He bent close enough that his breath, hot and metallic, ghosted over Darian's cheek. Kill me? He repeated softer, as if it were a prayer. Before there's nothing left to love. Tears blurred Darian's vision. He shook his head, the crown upon it too heavy, crushing bone. I can't. Cassian's lips curved, not cruelly, not coldly, but gently, almost fond. A smile threaded with ruin. You can. I promised I'd teach you. Come, little wolf. Be king. Be the king I bled for. Darian's chest tore open with a sob. He lifted his sword, but the blade wavered, struck only by wind. He saw not a monster, but the man who had once sung him to sleep, who had once carried him through snow, who had once whispered you will be king when the world wanted him dead. I can't, he gasped, shaking broken. Cassian's eyes softened even as red overtook them, as if he forgave him for the weakness. One strike, that's all. Just one, and I'll be yours forever. The words clawed Darian apart. His arms trembled. His knees nearly buckled. His whole body screamed to obey, to finish it, to set them both free. But his heart locked him in place. Cassian straightened. The tenderness evaporated like morning frost under flame. His body shuddered, split wider, and thorns speared into the sky, blotting out the last shred of sun. His voice thundered across the battlefield, no longer his alone. If you don't kill me, he roared, voice mingled with Eshkur's hunger, I will slaughter all you claim to love. I will raise your kingdom. I will drench your throne in the blood of your people. The crown cracked, not the metal one upon Darian's head, but the invisible one inside his chest. The part that still believed he could save Cassian without destroying him. It shattered with the sound of 10,000 screams. And as thorns sealed the heavens, Darian realized the truth he had run from since boyhood. To love Cassian was to kill him, and to kill him was to love him enough. Chapter 32 The Thorned End. The throne hall had become a grave. The crown of thorns above the dais pulsed with black fire. Each beat a heartbeat that was not human. Walls split beneath the weight of creeping vines, their jagged points dragging blood across marble floors. The world smelled of iron, smoke, and the musk of a bond unraveling. And at the center of it, Cassian. What was left of him? His body was a ruin stitched together with godfire and shadow. Veins lit like molten chains across his chest, wings coiled in barbed flame, his hair a black river dripping with sparks. Yet his eyes, those fractured irises of gold and black, sought Darian with the same hunger they always had. "You're trembling, my king?" Cassian murmured, voice a knife dragged slow across skin. "Don't cry. You were born for thrones, not tears." Darian's sword shook in his grip. His lungs burned as if filled with glass. Every inch of him reeked of sweat and salt, his scent spilling uncontrolled, clawing for Cassian as if instinct still begged for bond instead of blade. "Stop!" Darian rasped, stumbling back against the shattered dais. Don't make me." Cassian's laughter drowned him. He moved like fire itself, closing the distance in an instant, pinning Darian against the ruin of a column. His mouth crashed against Darian's, brutal, searing, more devour than kiss. Darian whimpered, a broken sound, even as he pushed back, steel between them, body betraying him by arching into the heat. Cassian's clawed hand slid into his hair, yanking his head back to bare his throat. His breath scalded the gland at Darian's nape. "You are my king," he whispered into the skin, fangs grazing. "My only one. Let me ruin you properly before you kill me." The sword trembled at Darian's side, useless. He gasped, shaking, tears slicking his face. "You shouldn't," his voice cracked. "You shouldn't have let me love you." The monster smiled against his throat. "And yet you do." The next strike came too fast. Cassian drove him down, claws tangling with the blade until sparks spat between them. Darian fought back, every swing desperate, tearing through black vines that regrew instantly, wrapping his wrists, his legs, like living chains. Each cut drew blood but no end. And still Cassian kissed him in every opening, on the mouth, the jaw, the tears sliding across his cheek, mocking battle with tenderness sharpened into torment. "Kill me, little wolf," he whispered, voice breaking through the roar of thorn fire. "Or I'll make you mine until there's nothing left to save." Darian screamed, not from fear, not even from rage, but from the impossible fracture inside him, love and hate ripping him in half. His chest heaved, his blood sang with despair. Then he bit down, hard. His own wrist tore under his teeth, warm iron flooding his tongue. Blood spilled down his arm, dripping onto Cassian's claws. The moment it touched, the bond snapped wide open, information, scent, raw spirit bursting like wildfire. Cassian froze, eyes widening as the resonance hit him, their souls colliding. His lips parted, a moan guttural and wrecked escaping his throat. "You!" His body shook violently, the vines convulsing, the flames stuttering. Darian shoved forward with everything left in him, pressing his bleeding wrist hard to Cassian's chest. "If you wanted chains," he sobbed, "then choke on mine." The resonance roared into death throes, bond twisted into collapse, every nerve in Darian's body sparking agony and ecstasy at once. Cassian staggered, clutching Darian close even as blood bubbled at his lips, his claws digging into Darian's back as if to never let go. And then, the sword found its mark. Darian drove it in with a scream, the blade splitting flesh, piercing heart. Their foreheads pressed together, tears and sweat and blood all the same. Cassian's voice trembled in his ear, soft, so soft, it broke him. "Good, my king." Darian sobbed as the light burst from the wound, their bond collapsing in a single blinding convulsion. Cassian's body convulsed once, twice, then stilled. His arms slackened, sliding away, leaving Darian cradling his weight as if the world had ended. The hall fell silent. Even the thorns ceased their frenzy, curling inward as though to mourn. Darian's chest heaved, his eyes unseeing, his hands shaking against the blood-drenched hilt. And in the distance, behind the throne of thorns, the crown itself gave a single tremor, like a beast stirring in sleep. Chapter 33, A Throne of Thorns. The battlefield was quiet in a way that no battlefield should ever be. The air no longer burned. The black vines that had once screamed skyward were now brittle and crumbling, collapsing inward like a dying beast. The smoke cleared by degrees, the smell of charred flesh and iron fading beneath a strange stillness. Above, the clouds split, revealing a thin blade of sunlight. It was sharp, merciless, cutting across ruin. Darian lay sprawled on the fractured marble, chest heaving, blood-soaked hands still clenched on the sword hilt. Beside him, there was no longer a man. Cassian's body had unraveled. Where flesh had been, there remained only thorns, black, glistening with the last of his magic. They coiled together like a crown broken loose from his veins, creeping upward to encircle the vacant throne. The seat of kingship was no longer bare stone but a monument to ruin. A chair of barbed vines, twisted from the corpse of the man Darian had loved, hated, and killed. Darian's fingers reached for what was left. They sank into the thorns, slicing skin, blood mixing with the remnants of Cassian's breath. He dragged himself closer until his forehead pressed to the jagged briars. "Cassian!" His voice cracked, hoarse as if torn from marrow. "Don't you leave me with nothing." The thorns cut deeper, their barbs cruel, but he clung to them anyway. He pulled the vines to his chest like he once clung to Cassian's robes as a boy, when nightmares had drowned him. But now the nightmare was real, and Cassian would never again reach down to brush his hair back, never again whisper "little wolf." A sob broke loose from his chest, shuddering. It tore him open until he could not contain it. The sound that followed was no human cry. Darian tilted his head to the ruin of the ceiling and howled. The voice ripped the air. It was grief, it was fury. It was love so vicious it could only destroy. The cry rolled through the wreckage of the city, across the wounded plain, up to the breaking sky. Men fell to their knees. Soldiers pressed fists to the ground, trembling at the sound that made the air shiver. Even the northern banners bent in the wind as though bowing to the unmaking of a king and the making of another. Their voices followed, scattered at first, then one roar, "The king! The king!" But Darian did not hear them. He was on his knees, arms wound tight around the thorned remains, blood dripping from his palms where barbs split flesh. His tears streaked through the grime of battle, falling onto the briars, soaking into the black veins that once belonged to Cassian. His crown was gone, lost in the fight. But as he pressed his face against the throne made of thorns, the people knew. The throne had chosen him. The man he killed had chosen him. And so Darian's first act as king was to weep, shaking, clutching the corpse of his ruin as if it were a lover, as if love could still bind what blood had severed. Behind him, the army bowed lower. They had seen kings rise before, but never like this, born not of coronation but of loss. Grief carved into bone. The sun spread wider, painting him in gold. But Darian's heart was a chasm. He whispered, voice so low only the thorns could hear, "If you were going to leave me, you shouldn't have taught me how to need you." The vines pulsed once, faintly. No one else noticed. But Darian froze. For in the wreckage of scent and ash, beneath the sting of his own blood, there lingered the faintest trace. Not smoke, not iron, not ruin. a note of something he knew as intimately as his own breath. Cassian, his scent, ghostly, fading. But there. Darian pressed closer, shaking, eyes wide, as the barbs pricked deeper into his skin. "You're still here," he whispered, desperate, feral. "I can smell you. Don't lie to me. Don't go." The throne did not answer, but the scent clung, faint and cruel, like a promise or a curse. And Darian, crowned in thorns, wept anew, because love had not ended. It had only changed shape. The throne, now living and dead, would never let him forget. Chapter 34, The Ring Behind the Crown. The kingdom was rebuilding stone by stone, blood by blood. Walls were raised where ruin had collapsed. The bodies had been buried in the frost-laced earth outside the gates, and already new banners snapped in the cold wind, their colors as sharp as the iron faces of the soldiers who bore them. Darian ruled over it all from the throne of thorns, and his silence was law. He no longer spoke more than he had to. Edicts came crisp, cold, and cruel. Traitors were executed without trial, their names stricken from every record. Taxes were doubled, not to punish but to rebuild, and no one dared complain when the new king's pale eyes swept across the hall. In court, Darian's voice was steel. In council, it was ice. Even Viral flinched at the weight of it. "The people whisper you are colder than Cassian ever was," one of the ministers murmured, half afraid. Darian's mouth curved, but it was not a smile. "Good," he answered simply, and the chamber went still. That was the face he gave to the kingdom. But in the quiet of the nights, when the halls were deserted and the candle flames had burned down to nubs, he returned to the room Cassian had once ruled from, a chamber still haunted by the scent of ink and blood. The desk was the same, its wood dark, its surface gouged with scratches from years of sleepless nights and bitter quarrels. Cassian's papers still lay there, some smudged with dried blood from the last battle, others bearing his sharp, angular handwriting that even fire had not managed to erase. Darian touched them the way one might touch a wound that refused to close. He ran his fingertips across the dried ink, his throat closing. "You always wrote like you were cutting the page apart," he whispered to the empty room. "Like the paper had to bleed for you." There was no answer, of course. Only silence, only the cold. But he continued, as if the silence were him. "Do you see it, Cassian? The kingdom you wanted me to have is mine now. I've crushed every tongue that doubted me. I've broken every hand that dared rise against me." His voice faltered. "I did it, just like you said I should." He looked down at his own hand. The ring gleamed dully in the candlelight, silver, ancient, worn smooth by time, set with a thorn-shaped etching so fine it was almost invisible. No one else in the world knew it was there. No one else had seen Cassian, in that last night, take Darian's hand and slide it onto his finger without a word. He had not taken it off since. The ministers never saw it. On the throne, he kept his hands folded, hidden by gloves of black wolfskin. But at night, alone, he would pull the glove away, stare at the ring, and feel his chest tear open anew. Sometimes he spoke to it. "Was this your way of binding me, even in death?" he asked, voice hoarse, eyes bloodshot from too many sleepless nights. "Or was it the only way you knew to stay with me?" His hand shook as he lifted it higher, the silver catching the glow of the dying candle. He pressed his lips against it, eyes closing, the taste of iron and old ash still vivid in memory. He imagined Cassian laughing at him, cold and cruel, pathetic, little wolf, clinging to a corpse. And yet, in the reflection of the mirror across the room, he saw himself, a king in black, a thorn crown above his head, and at his lips a silver ring. The image twisted something in him, unbearable and intoxicating both. He leaned closer, pressing his mouth again to the metal, as if to Cassian's skin. "Say something," Darian begged the silence. "Mock me, curse me, anything but this quiet." But there was only the faint crackle of candlewick, the slow breath of night. His throat worked. His body ached with the memory of arms that would never again close around him. His hand clenched into a fist around the ring until the edge bit deep, pain blooming to remind him it was real. Moonlight shifted through the window. Darian lifted his head at last, eyes hollow, the ring still pressed against his lips. He whispered into the dark, voice broken, so quiet it was almost prayer. "You told me to be ruthless. You told me to harden my heart. Look at me, Cassian." His tears slid silently. "I've done it. I've become the king you wanted. But it cost me you." The room gave no answer. The silver thorn cut deeper against his mouth, and he welcomed it. By the time sleep stole him, head bowed over the desk still marked with Cassian's blood, he was still holding his hand to his lips. And in the dream, Cassian's voice returned, as cruel and tender as always. "You see, you could do it all along." Moonlight fell across the new king's face, pale and unyielding, and Darian murmured into the silver, "You told me to be cruel. I am, and God's help me, I still want you." Chapter 35, The Light on the Lake. The dream came quietly, like water closing over his head. Darian found himself barefoot on the soft earth of Moonlake's shore. The night air was cool, damp with the scent of reeds and the faint perfume of lilies drifting across the dark water. The moon hung low and heavy, its reflection unbroken in the lake's surface. It was so still that he almost believed he had stepped back into boyhood, before the crown, before the wars, before blood had become the only ink his life was written in. And then he saw him. Cassian stood at the water's edge, black hair long enough to stir in the breeze, the heavy folds of his robe spilling down into the damp grass. His figure glowed faintly in the silver light, not the monster Darian had killed, not the minister with cold, dangerous eyes, but something impossibly gentle. His hands cupped a small flame, and with a slow breath, he lowered it into the lantern at his feet. One light, then another, until a dozen lamps glimmered along the shore, their reflections painting the lake with fire. "Cassian," Darian whispered. The sound left him raw. Cassian turned. He was smiling softly, faintly, without the cruel curve that so often accompanied his words. His eyes, violet as twilight, seemed to hold only warmth. No blackened veins, no thorn-crowned madness. Just the man who had once sat by his bedside and sung him to sleep. "You finally did it," Cassian said, voice carrying over the still water. "You killed hard enough, ruthlessly enough, just as I taught you." His head tilted, and for a moment Darian thought he saw sorrow there. "But I still remember the light in your eyes." Darian's knees nearly buckled. He reached out, hand trembling, desperate to close the distance. "Don't say that. Don't talk like you're gone. You're right here. You're here." He stepped forward, the grass cool under his feet, the lamps reflecting like stars fallen into the water. But every step brought him no closer. Cassian remained across the small stretch of shore, untouchable, though his smile never wavered. "You've carried me with you," Cassian murmured. "In your blood, in your crown, in that little ring you refused to take off. I'm not gone. I want you," Darian choked, his voice breaking into a sob. "Not your shadow, not your thorns. You. I'd give up everything, throne, kingdom, crown, if I could just have you back." Cassian's eyes softened further. For one fragile heartbeat, he looked almost sad, almost human. "You always did say that," he whispered. "But you were born to be king, little wolf. You can't outrun it even for me." Darian's hand reached into the air, fingers aching, but the distance stretched like a wound that would never close. His body shook as he tried again, a low whimper breaking his throat. "Please, let me touch you. Just once more." Cassian only shook his head. "If you touch me, you'll never wake again. And your kingdom still needs its king." The lanterns flickered in the wind, their reflections fractured on the water, scattering like pieces of a broken crown. Darian's tears slipped silently down his face, catching in the moonlight. Cassian bent, lighting one last lamp. He placed it at the water's edge and pushed it into the lake. The small flame floated out across the dark expanse, leaving a trail of gold trembling behind it. "Do you remember?" Cassian asked, his voice as gentle as that night so long ago when he had tucked Darian beneath a cloak and sung him through his fever. "We promised we'd come back here. You said, if I stayed, you'd give up the throne and hide away with me." Darian nodded, broken, his chest heaving. "I would have. Gods, I still would." Cassian looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Then, with the faintest sigh, he said, "I told you I'd die in your hands. And I did." His eyes shone, brighter than the lamps, brighter than the moon. "That's enough." Darian fell to his knees, both hands outstretched toward the figure who remained forever just beyond reach. His sob shook the lake itself, scattering ripples through the reflection of the lamps. "Don't leave me," he begged, his voice splintering. "Don't." But Cassian's image began to blur. The lamps wavered, their light bending, scattering. The lake swallowed the glow, and Darian woke. The throne room was dark. The black crown of thorns loomed above him, and beneath it, the new king sat slumped forward, one hand pressed against his lips. The silver ring gleamed faintly, catching the moonlight through the broken windows. His eyes closed again, and his whisper was so faint it seemed part of the wind. "You told me to be cruel. I am. But gods, Cassian, I still wanted to love you." The moonlight shifted. Behind the throne, in the cracks between shattered stones, something stirred. A circle of thorns, black and sharp, still crowned the empty seat. But from the roots of those same briars, pale shoots pushed upward. Small, fragile, and silver white, they curled like new promises toward the light. At their center, half buried in the stone, the silver ring glimmered. And though the throne room lay empty, it seemed to whisper with a voice only Darian could hear. "You are still mine, little wolf.